Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 89 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. We got lots to cover here today. In the Bitcoin side, we are at new all-time highs. We passed that 118,000 mark. We also had a new political party from Elon Musk, as well as the updates from tariffs and all of the different things that happened at the BRICS summit. And on the geopolitical side, apparently, there's nothing to see here with the Epstein files. In fact, they don't even exist. There is no blackmail operation, and it's not connected to any of the things that any long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk will know it is deeply connected to. We're going to be covering all of that and more today. So the Epstein files are closed as Bitcoin reaches new all-time high. And so what are we going to be doing this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics? If you're new to the show, my name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years now obsessing over the topic of money, investing, reform. And when Bitcoin came, Bitcoin too, ever since the beginning at the first Bitcoin conference in Europe. And we're going to be covering everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. So before part one, when we dive into everything that happened in Bitcoin, as I said, we are at new all-time highs at the same time as the dollar having the worst performance since 1973. This week in macro, we're going to be covering the tariffs, we're going to be covering BRICS, and we're going to be covering following the money behind Musk's new party. Most people think that Elon Musk wants to pay down the debt. When we follow the money, we get the true story, not the story that he wants you to believe. So we're going to be digging into that. And in the geopolitical side, we're going to dive deep into the Epstein stuff. We're going to tell you the real story and why it coincided with Netanyahu's visit to the White House when they decided that there is nothing to see here. And all of the behind the scenes stuff that we do when we follow the money rather than listen to the media and listen to the lies they want you to believe. So without further ado, let's jump into This Week in Bitcoin, Part 1, Bitcoin Hard Talk, Episode 89. So Bitcoin, I hope you've been listening. I've been shouting as loud as I can since Bitcoin was $3, telling people own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. And when it hit $10, everybody said it's too late, I missed the boat, the price is too high. When it hit $100, everyone said it's too low, it's too high, it's too late, I missed the boat, the price is too high. $1,000, they did the same. $100,000, they did the same. And everyone will be thinking the same at $118,000. And yet, this year alone, Bitcoin has risen another 55% just since April 2025. And everybody would have said, it's too late, I missed the boat. Fixed money, hard money, money you can own, money that has a fixed supply, and money that you can spend without permission from government, without need for a bank, and without the central banksters trying to plan it, has higher and higher demand. And so we are well into the $2 trillion market cap. Now, it reached this new all-time high of $118,000 this week at the very same time when the US dollar has had its weakest ever start to a year since 1973. And that was the era of stagflation in the 70s as well. Now, we are analyzing whether we're going to have that. I'm not sure whether we are because Trump has completely shown his cards, and we'll be covering more of that in the macro section. But either way, Bitcoin seems to be that it is a two-way bet, a hedge against the reckless policy of the Federal Reserve banksters and the ability to benefit from the policy of the Federal Reserve banksters while simultaneously boycotting it if you hold it in self-custody. For this proof of work is the peaceful resistance against the proof of weapons network that thrives on printing money, creating inflation, creating wealth inequality in its own country, creating inflation all around the world, and raging wars and covert wars so that it can print more bombs and it can say we are the greatest economy and print more GDP based upon crony capitalism and an ever and ever increasing government. Well, it has slid the US dollar has now slid 11% over the last 6 months. That's significant. So you've got the opportunity cost of 55% on Bitcoin upside. You've got the downward pressure of 11%. And they get to say our stocks are at new all-time highs. They're at new all-time highs because the dollar is weakening, which is pushing the price of assets up. If you actually price it in Bitcoin, you'll realize that it's not been a bull market, it's been a bear market. Or even if you want to be more conservative and price it in the real store of value for the last 5,000 years, gold, and you'll find that not really you are engaging in an optical illusion based upon a weakening of the dollar and the systemic wealth confiscation from those that don't have assets over to those that do hold those assets. So your job is to beat the proof of weapons network. And the best tool that I know that anybody can use without having to do what I do, follow the money day in, day out, is just simply own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, regardless of the price. And everybody feels like they're buying the top. Everybody feels like it's too late. Everybody feels like they missed the boat. But I've been saying the same thing for 14 years. And I think I've got, created more millionaires. I get messages every day from just normal people. I got a message, in fact, that some, guy said, hey, just an ordinary pleb from the UK. I work at the NHS. And I've now made it to millionaire status, which was never, ever possible. He didn't even think it was ever possible in his situation. His wife thanks him every day. And that's not even including the billionaires. And all they did was own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, kept that habit up for a minimum of 4 years, got to boycott the proof of weapons network. And later they decided if they wanted to pay down their debt so that they could boycott the banks. And then with their wealth, they could engage in lobby and actually have real impact in politics rather than thinking that politicians listen to anybody that isn't paying them. And then they get to use their wealth in order to spend local, support their local farmers, engage in investing in new decentralized systems, and really do bottom-up movement that only comes from beating the proof of weapons network, while the others are going to need you when they're stuck in their debt enslavement because they listened to the Keynesian economics that was taught to them how to end up with a mortgage, get a good job in their credit card debt. And they ended up doing everything they did, and it's causing more and more despondence and more mental illness, more and more wealth inequality, more and more depression, more and more drug addiction all around the world, especially in the West, because they did what they said they were told to do. They followed the proof of weapons network, and now they're wondering why they're not able to buy a house. And the only thing they can do is take all of their income, give it to the bank, and end up with a debt enslavement for the rest of their life. However, those that own Bitcoin, Bitcoin has now overtaken Google as the world's 6th largest asset in the world by market capitalization. Over $2.2 trillion. I think it passed $2.3 trillion is going around there. So you didn't have to create Google. You didn't have to be in the seed round of Google by being connected to the VCs at the proof of weapons network. You could have just done that. You still can do that today. It's the great equalizer for those that actually do it. Now we have got our eye on gold, because gold is that $20 trillion number one market cap asset in the world. We've got another 10x to catch up with gold, but we're eating away with it. We've been eating away at it all this time. There's only four assets between Bitcoin and gold now. We've taken on silver. We've taken on Saudi Aramco. We've taken out Google now. But this is really the first time this year since February, because all of this proof of weapons network craziness, tariff policies, carnage around the world has been driving people into gold. As we move to this multipolar world order, gold has been a real high performing asset. In fact, it outperformed Bitcoin this year. But now, if you look at February, Bitcoin has now overtaken gold in terms of its year-to-date performance, rising approximately 27% versus gold's 26%. And so even when you have these amazing years for gold, you tend to have digital hard sound money that is now more scarce than gold in terms of a stock to flow ratio. And I got nothing against gold. Gold is an awesome thing to have hard money. But as the price goes up, they find more gold. You tend to have about 2% increase in the supply. But now Bitcoin, as more and more of the Bitcoin is mined, there's only another million left to mine. So what's in the way between Bitcoin and gold right now? Well, you got Amazon. Now, we overtook Amazon slightly, but it's come back up again. We'll wipe out Amazon, I'm sure, at some stage. You got Apple, which is trying to catch up in terms of artificial intelligence. You got Microsoft, which is adjusting to artificial intelligence by having a position in OpenAI. And of course, you've got the darling of the stock market, NVIDIA, which said, we're going to help create all of these data centers for artificial intelligence. So as we pivot to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies, they're building the infrastructure for all of this command and control, surveillance, everything that's coming in the big, beautiful bill. And there's only 4 different stocks that we, as Bitcoin, is between us and gold. And finally, we're looking at we're looking at the asset of gold. And I anticipate, I'm not giving you a time frame, but everybody that owns more Bitcoin this month than the previous month will eventually find out that the demand for digital hard sound money you can own without having to store blocks of gold and not be able to put them on a plane when you change country, money you can spend, which is very hard to spend a block of gold, and money that has a fixed supply that you can audit. And I watched one of the books that I went back to this year. If you haven't read it, a great book is called Tower of Basel. It goes through the Bank for International Settlements during World War I and World War II. Well, it was actually set up after World War I in order to manage reparations between Germany and the new rising powers. But it actually funded the Nazi movement by whenever the Nazi party or Hitler would go in and invade a new country like Czechoslovakia, it would actually take over the digital ledger at the Bank for International Settlements. So the gold would stay at the Bank for International Settlements. The gold would stay at the Bank of England. The gold would stay in the Federal Reserve. And countries would try and get repossession. But every time that Germany invaded a new country, the Bank for International Settlement would just simply say, you know that Czechoslovakian gold? Right, we're going to put it in a drawer and we're going to put a new label on top of it. And that now belongs to Germany. And this funded the growth of the Nazi movement. Every time that it invaded a new country, the Bank for International Settlements would give it some new gold. And when the countries wanted to get their gold, they knocked on the door and they said, well, we don't have your label on it anymore. And they couldn't get it. And in fact, they had to fly naval fleets. I remember France tried to get its gold back from the Federal Reserve. It had to show up. And then eventually in 71, it moved to, well, we're not converting our dollars to gold anymore. What a use case for Bitcoin. Wait till countries figure out that they can have digital hard sound money that they can own, spend, and store with a private key that allows them to instantly audit and transport it globally. It's like the gold standard with all of the flaws and even more scarcity. And you know what the beauty is? We don't need to wait for that to happen. We don't even need for that to happen because you can opt out by owning your own Bitcoin in self-custody, and then you can store it, go wherever you want in the world. You can spend it. You need to wait for anyone to tell you how you can spend it at scale. And you know that the monetary policy will never change, and you don't need to worry what the Bank for International Settlements, what the Federal Reserve is doing. In fact, if the Federal Reserve pumps this debt-based Ponzi scheme until there is civil war on the streets because a few elite corporations and individuals own all the assets and there's nothing left for everybody else, and they protest on the street, Bitcoin will still benefit from that monetary policy. And then if it turns out that the whole thing collapses, then you need money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply. So it's like a two-way bet on whatever happens. And do you know what that does to your peace of mind? Once you actually really internalize that. Now, I can't give you financial advice and prove that the future equals the past, but I can tell you that every time I own fiat currency, I buy more Bitcoin, even though I've been doing that ever since $3. And you can do the same. And I will continue to spread this message and help you understand the proof of weapons network until you are fully onboarded to the proof of work network. And at the very least, you can say, well, I waited until the final central bank owned gold, and then I realized that now it is good enough, because you're waiting for the central bank to say that it's good enough. And you will pay a lot higher price for that. But don't worry, the supply will still be fixed. The monetary policy won't change. You just won't benefit from everything that happened prior to that. And you can delay your exit from the atrocities, the war, the violence that the proof of weapons network creates in these debt-based Ponzi scheme fiat currencies that perpetuate more debt, because there's not even enough money to pay off the debt, and you can't pay off the debt. And you have people like Elon Musk and politicians around the world pretending you can. Well, anyway, the market is telling you something, so you should listen to the market. The US House Committee on Financial Services even came out and said this week that the House will be delivering on President Trump's call to make the US basically the crypto capital of the world. So next week in the US, it is this thing that's been created during the Trump administration called US Crypto Week. What is US Crypto Week? Well, they'll be discussing all the legislation that's required in order to make sure that you're able to own your own private key and you can protect yourself from central bank digital currencies, because we know how America works. They don't want the government to have any control. The government is a mechanism for corporate interest. So rather than central bank digital currencies owned by a government, you obviously have a privatized central bank owned by banks, and you have technology companies that now want to issue the equivalent of central bank digital currencies, programmable money, but where they get to keep all the profit at the private level, which is why you're getting stablecoin legislation. And we've covered that in many, many different things. So what are they going to be discussing next week? Well, they'll be discussing the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act is essentially market structure. This is where they will determine who is it that it regulates. Is it a security, a commodity? Is it a currency? What's a stable coin? What's Bitcoin? What's staking? What's proof of work? They'll be giving clarity on this. It does what it says on the tin. And so that is the next piece of legislation that's happening within the US market structure, because next week we may have the final confirmation that the Genius Act has been confirmed, which is essentially the stablecoin standard, or the stablecoin system that is slowly being transitioned over to, as the technical companies are kind of raging a power struggle, and I'll cover more in the macro section, against the legacy financial system. It's still a debt-based Ponzi scheme because stablecoins are backed by US government debt. However, it is a power shift and a power struggle, because the third thing that they're looking to discuss is the anti-CBDC Act. So America is not looking to do a central bank digital currency. Unlike Europe, in October, they'll be beta testing their digital euro, their central bank digital currency. And obviously the deep state and the proof of weapons network, the corporate interest, the power struggle. I covered a video. I got a blog. If you want to go to my blog on simondixon.com and find out what is the proof of weapons network, just do a search. You'll find a blog there where I've got a short 10-minute explanation or a 1-hour deep dive, written explanation, summaries, and all that stuff. You can do that to understand what it actually is and how it all works. They're going to be doing everything with stable coins in the US, and they're going to be experimenting with central bank digital currencies in Europe, controlled by the same power structure. And one mechanism is using the European Union and the European Central Bank. You can steal wealth, you can build surveillance state, you can transfer that up to the same corporations, and the same corporations that will be issuing stable coins within America, where their shares are owned by the same asset managers within the proof of weapons network, as it hedges against the banks that own shares in the Federal Reserve that create the digital dollar every time they issue the loan. So the banks create the digital dollar. That leads to being able to purchase more government debt. And then that government debt backs up the stable coins that the technology companies, and they can portfolio manage the complete control of the financial system based upon things that Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are building. And for example, Elon Musk, Tesla, because it actually added Bitcoin to its balance sheet, it almost had another $1,750 million last time I looked at the price of unrealized profit just by holding some of its balance sheet, some of its dollar reserves in Bitcoin treasury, which is why there is an explosion of treasury companies. Now, I prefer the real businesses that want to put some of their operating, some of their balance sheet within Bitcoin as a mechanism for protecting itself from the proof of weapons network. However, there are companies that are just setting up, creating, just to take a shell public company, put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And if you have been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, you won't be messing around with any of these things, but you'll be understanding that this creates a structural bid. And they're going out and raising finance from the debt capital markets or selling equity on the equity capital markets in order to buy more Bitcoin as they construct these different types of structured products and various other things as well. Elon Musk came out today and said that his new America Party, we're going to be digging a little bit deeper into that in the macro section and what it's really about, because it's not about paying the national debt. If you believe that, I got a lovely new war to sell the proof of weapons network. But the American Party will essentially be embracing Bitcoin. So he's taking many of the things that Trump said and then saying that we'll do that. So if you don't get a Bitcoin strategic reserve in the Trump administration, he's saying the American Party is the one that will embrace Bitcoin into that as well. Now, remember, I talked about tariff policy would create lots of mergers and acquisitions. We'll go through more of that in the macro section. But with relation to Bitcoin, we're seeing more consolidation in the Bitcoin mining sector. So one of the Bitcoin miners, CoreWeave, it acquired Core Scientific. It paid approximately $9 billion for Core Scientific. And if you don't know, I've throughout the years, I've been covering some of the Bitcoin lending companies and some of the companies that were involved in operations like Celsius as well. Celsius creditors, they ended up having a bunch of Core Scientific shares. So if you are one of those Celsius creditors, we haven't been told exactly. I was the 7th largest creditor because I had a small percentage in my Bitcoin. I was experimenting with borrowing against it, which is why I've got all the experience of why I'll never do that again. But you'll have to go through your own journey. In previous episodes, I've shared in detail what happened with those. But anyway, if you are one of those creditors and one of those shareholders, depending on what happened with those Core Scientific shares, they may be involved in that acquisition as well. Now, remember how they actually did it as well. It's a lesson for everybody. Essentially, because people put Bitcoin in Celsius and they were receiving some yield, which was fake yield in a debt-based Ponzi scheme, because you exchange your real Bitcoin for fake Bitcoin and an IOU. They were taking that Bitcoin and they sent it over to Tether, and Tether was issuing a collateralized loan. A collateralized loan means that if you hold your Bitcoin with us, we'll give you $2 billion of Tether. You can go spend that stable coin Tether. We'll hold the Bitcoin. But if the price of Bitcoin crashes, then we do a margin call, which means you either put more Bitcoin or they liquidate the Bitcoin and in a basically a collateralized loan. That's how the product works. Well, Celsius did that, and they borrowed $2 billion against client Bitcoin. And then the estate went out and bought all these different mining operations like Core Scientific and ordered a load of ASICs and created a business to try and have a mining operation, which essentially in a platform, which is like a bank essentially without a banking license, where people could withdraw their coins, but then they were locked up in an investment that was borrowing long as well. No wonder the whole thing ended in a disaster. Plus, Majinsky was just going around and trading. And plus, it was connected to Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu's niece and nephew were the largest investors in one of these companies that got hacked and stole money. Plus, it was connected to the head of lending, was an IDF soldier that was pushing out propaganda now related to all sorts of operations, and now is in business with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel. So it was definitely a deep state operation connected to things like Operation Choke Point 2.0, which ended up having BlackRock take over the market by approving the Bitcoin ETF. And by market, it just means for those of you that fall for handing over your Bitcoin to the banksters and financial institutions that had to capitulate, and so put together an operation to try and choke the industry so that they could catch up and end up with as much Bitcoin as possible. Covered that on many different times. But anyway, as a result of this, the Celsius estate has a claim on approximately 40,000 Bitcoin or so. And it was approved in court to move forward to discovery so that the Celsius estate could sue Tether and for those Bitcoin, which is likely to lead to some kind of settlement. But there's approximately 40,000 Bitcoin. Now, because I was involved in the bankruptcy, I actually lobbied the judge to make sure that we ended up keeping the Bitcoin. And we were the only bankruptcy where, rather than dollarizing all this Bitcoin and selling it, we actually received as much Bitcoin was left back. And so they created a whole process, the first bankruptcy, that would distribute Bitcoin rather than turning it into dollars, which is what happened at the FTX, where even people within the FTX bankruptcy are just corruptly saying, right, you're from Ukraine or you're from China, we're wiping out your claim. You're not even entitled to the money that they thought was yours. This is why we self-custody, because all of these scammy legal loopholes that exist within the system that was lobbied by the Proof of Weapons Network and the banksters in collaboration with the scammy lawyers that set up the Proof of Weapons Network as well, basically just created this system to allow for all of these little loopholes when you engage in centralized financial service. Bitcoin created a way for us not to have to do that. Anyway, a couple of years later, and we're still having to engage in some of those processes as well. Right. Moving on. There was a statistic that came out this week, and I thought it was pretty interesting. It said that less than 7% of the global population is invested in quote unquote crypto. So 7% of the population is apparently, by this statistic, the amount of people, which is remarkable, having been involved in this right from the beginning, to even be in a position where 7% of the population is engaged in this market. But at the same time, as Bitcoin has become this global asset, the sixth largest asset in the world, headed for gold, we've got, we still have so much more. It's still early. In fact, if you look at the global money market, and when we go through the macro trends, if interest rates go down, this global money market may need new homes, especially as we're entering into this phase of boomers passing on their wealth to the next generation. And the next generation is kind of crypto native or Bitcoin first. And hopefully we've captured a lot of those people that will be redistributing that wealth. But how much is locked up in money market funds at the moment? This is dollar denominated or fiat currency denominated assets, which are trying to just about beat inflation and give some income to pensioners or various other people. There is $75 trillion locked up in money markets that's going to, in the future, go through a intergenerational wealth transfer. And if the market goes out the way Trump wants, that we'll be covering in part 2 in macro, will be in a lower zero interest rate or ZIRP or lower interest rate environment that will may be looking for a new home. And so there is a lot more market money to come into this market now as we become the 6th largest asset in the world. These types of funds may be using corporate bonds and other different types of products, but in the end, that leads to the purchase of Bitcoin through these structured products or whatever it comes through. Now, you just need to know that that exists. I don't want you to be doing that as an individual. I'm assuming you're an individual listening to this. But if Trump gets his way, as this goes to a few more $1 trillion asset, there's all these different pools of money that open up that would only even consider an asset that maybe has this. Now, we've also been covering some of the corruption. And I've covered the Justin Sun story, so I'm not going to be going through it again. I've covered that in previous episodes. But it came out that essentially Justin Sun is going to be investing $100 million in Trump's token. Now, after they started investing in his other tokens, suddenly he was buying his freedom from the SEC through essentially the crypto lobby, and his SEC case goes away. So these are the types of things that are happening as this crypto lobby is also being built. Corrupt, whether you want to engage in politics or not, this is the benefit of beating the proof of weapons network by owning more Bitcoin each month than the previous month, chipping away at the monetary policy that beats every asset class historically, and then putting yourself in a position where if you want to engage in politics, you don't do what everyone else is doing, where you think that your vote matters when it's the lobby's vote and the money that matters. And then you can engage in lobbying. And this corruption and crony capitalism exists. It's how the system works. But I just want to show you an example of how the proof of weapons network, by escaping it with proof of work, you end up joining the lobby process as this new emerging crypto lobby emerges. For me, not my cup of tea. I make sure that I get the hell out of those proof of weapons network countries. I left the GBP debt-based Ponzi scheme, and boy, am I glad. We'll cover more about what's happening there in the macro section. We also had an announcement. So good stuff coming here. The US Treasury decided, as I said, in the Trump administration, you get more big print, you get more wartime expenditure, you get all the things like the removal of the Jeffrey Epstein stuff that we'll be covering, but you definitely got your Bitcoin promise and the ability for you to get the hell away from the proof of weapons network. So the US Treasury decided to bin its crypto broker ruling that was under the Biden administration. Essentially, this just means that when you're engaging in self-custody, the Biden administration, through Operation Choke Point 2.0, with the corrupt policy, with BlackRock, with the Fed, with Jerome Powell and Gary Gensler from the SEC, and by listening to people like SBF, a part of the operation that got taken down, was sacrificed for the network, they were coming after self-custody and saying that if you engage in a self-custody exchange transaction, you could be considered a crypto broker, which means you would need to register and comply with all sorts of regulations just as an individual. It was an operation to try and wipe out the industry and hand it over to the centralized controllers. Basically, by reversing this, Bitcoin in self-custody in the US is safe for now. It means that you don't need to KYC code. You can essentially still engage in decentralized exchanges and various other things. And there is no additional IRS requirements on peer-to-peer transactions. Don't treat this as tax advice. Don't treat this as legal advice. Don't treat this as financial advice. But anyway, removing some of these policies means that the chokehold on self-custody has been removed for now. So you should make sure that you're keeping up with that. But it also means that the centralized exchanges, which is what most people use in order to acquire Bitcoin, some people use them to store their Bitcoin, which is a really bad idea. The centralized exchanges, they still report, they're still subjected to the same requirement, but you can take it out into self-custody and you can become sovereign. So basically, Bitcoin stays free in self-custody based upon these changes that are happening. What else did we get? We got an announcement from TradFi players. So a company called StreamX and a company called BioSig Technologies basically announced an agreement for approximately $1.1 billion USD in growth financing to launch a gold-backed treasury management strategy and basically want to expand the real-world asset tokenization industry for the approximate $142 trillion commodity market. Now, this is a mix between self-custody, but it's backed by real-world assets. Therefore, you have tokenization. We've been at this for a long time over the decades, but now the big TradFi players are looking to get into it. When you go from digital to physical, there's trust involved. So it's not the same thing. But to be able to use these tokenized assets to go from one exchange to another in self-custody and then have a representation of the custody, it's not the same as Bitcoin. It helps people understand why having a digital commodity backed by the world's largest distributed supercomputer called proof of work is beneficial. But anyway, there is serious capital going into that. And so you'll be able to go from your digital hard sound money like Bitcoin, and then with your spending money, you'll be able to go into tokenized real world assets, into stable coins that are not subjected to some of the risk of fractional reserve banks. But all of this is happening, and this is the industry and the foundation that's being built within the US. Now, with these centralized platforms, I am deeply skeptical, because we know that it is the deep state of the deep state actors that are getting involved in all of these different things, because the funding round was led by financial terrorist Cantor Fitzgerald. This is... basically the guy, Howard Lutnick, which is playing Treasury. What is his role? Head of Commerce. Sorry if I got the name of the role, but you slap a role on it so that he can engage in all of the different corruption, get his little piece of the money printing and various other things. Cantor Fitzgerald is a discount broker for the Proof of Weapons Network, dealing in bond drugs for debt dealers. Cantor Fitzgerald is now getting into collateralized Bitcoin lending, slightly different from Celsius, the new grown-up version, but playing it upon being the Federal Reserve discount broker, socialize the losses, privatize the gain model, a sophisticated Ponzi scheme with the deep state actors that have access at the Federal Reserve level, but a similar flavor, just a larger version with bigger players. Anyway, beware whenever you see these names, these collateralized Bitcoin lenders that want to get involved in helping treasury companies in their flotations, and then utilizing structured products with the access to the Federal Reserve, because the second they want to reverse any of those trends, they can use monetary policy to create cascading liquidations so that you have a margin call, and then you can end up having to do exactly what happened between the Celsius creditors, Tether. They take your Bitcoin as margin. You end up with the shitty dollars at the end of it and a tax liability. And maybe at the worst case scenario, if you pick your drug company wrong, you end up in a Chapter 11 process where they turn your Bitcoin into dollars and the lawyers just steal it from you. These are the types of things. Beware these names. And who ends up buying those assets? Well, it's the private venture capital industry that ends up doing distressed asset purchases in these bankruptcy processes, or doing these Dutch auctions where they get the benefit of all the upside of your assets because they're playing the game. Howard Lutnick, remember, this is the same Howard Lutnick, and we'll cover more about this in the geopolitical section, that was neighbors with Jeffrey Epstein. the same Jeffrey Epstein that was an investor in Peter Thiel's operations and is connected to all of these people surrounded by Trump in the Trump administration, as well as the PayPal mafia and Elon Musk and the various other things that are now weaponizing it on each other right now so that they can keep the blackmail network going internally to prop up the proof of weapons network and all the crimes against humanity that happen in these fiat currency dirty circles of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. Speaking of the debt-based Ponzi scheme, after World War II, there was that relationship between the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan just became a speculative vehicle for hedge funds to be able to borrow 0% money after a stock market pump and dump scheme so that they can hedge the currency risk, do the carry trade, and buy stocks where they're very, very low price to pump up stocks in the US. And the Bank of Japan ends up owning all sorts of different assets. So those that want to protect themselves from the Japanese yen proof of weapons network, they end up buying stocks like Metaplanet. And the Metaplanet CEO came out and said he's been putting Bitcoin on his balance sheet. It's been a crazy speculative stock that has gone up way more than the Bitcoin value. But because there's an arbitrage between the American markets, the Japanese markets, and a bit of that carry play, you end up with this massive premium pricing and a speculative frenzy with Metaplanet as soon as it started to get into the Bitcoin strategy. And now what is it doing with its Bitcoin? It's saying, right, we've got the equity capital markets. We're using the debt capital markets to borrow to buy more Bitcoin. We get this increase in the share price by having Bitcoin on our corporate treasury balance sheet. And now we're going to take the Bitcoin in the corporation. And what are they going to do? They're going to borrow against it. So they're going to borrow against their Bitcoin in order to create a more profitable business in what they were actually doing, which is home purchases and real estate and hotels. So now they're going to take their Bitcoin and they're going to borrow against it and they're going to purchase hotels. And these hotels are subjected to the commercial real estate market. The commercial real estate market is being disrupted by nobody working in offices anymore, artificial intelligence, all of these different trends. And there is these markets which are hugely impacted by the long-term treasury rates that we'll be covering in the macro section. And then you combine Bitcoin with these fiat currency proof of weapons network. And because you're buying stocks instead of owning Bitcoin yourself, rather than you sitting outside and having a peaceful life, you're now subjected to the counterparty risk of the speculation of the debt capital markets, the equity capital markets, the Federal Reserve fiat currency Ponzi scheme, the rates, the types of things, the commercial real estate market, making sure that they get the leverage right, making sure you're kind of staying up to date with those financial statements and risking whether you end up in one of these bankruptcy processes, not even in a Chapter 11, but something like what happened with Mt. Gox in Japan, where 14 years, like over 10 years later, they still don't have those Bitcoin because of the Japanese system and bankruptcy process that happens when you try and shortcut just owning Bitcoin yourself in self-custody in the first place. Well, anyway, they're going to be using lots of Bitcoin as collateral, as always happens because these fiat debt-based Ponzi schemes, they can't help but turn a pristine asset into debt and leverage because they want to make money faster. And then they end up in the interest market and the speculative market when they never needed to be there in the first place. But anyway, speaking of Japan, the 10 trillion yen Japanese banking giant, let me get the name of this bank right, which is called Shinzai Bank, is now going to be offering a Bitcoin credit card. What does that mean? It means they want you to get more debt. They want you not to spend your money. They want you to buy on credit card. And to incentivize you to buy on credit card, they'll be paying you Bitcoin rewards with some of the those credit cards. So they're literally using Bitcoin as a mechanism to incentivize debt. This is what the banks do to try and get you to use your credit card as well. because a fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme needs more debt. And as hard money resists against the proof of weapons network, they need to find another mechanism like bribing you to take on debt to get more Bitcoin rewards. Now, I understand that you might find these products useful as you're managing your risk, but just make sure that your savings are in Bitcoin and self-custody and you own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and recognize that as you take risk with the fiat currency, that's not Bitcoin. It's a Bitcoin IOU, or it's Bitcoin collateral and a debt-based interest obligation, or it's a company stuck in the middle and you're adding all of that on top. Beware the banksters. That's the reason why Bitcoin was created in the first place. Speaking of banksters, Cynthia Lummis, who's got the Bitcoin Act or the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Act, is trying to get Congress to put some Bitcoin on its balance sheet in a market neutral way so that it can build a parallel asset as the debt gets worse and worse within America. And so she is trying to basically persuade Congress to spend trillions of dollars in a market neutral way so that they can end up with some Bitcoin as part of their strategic reserves within America. Now, remember, her colleagues in Congress that were pushing, to investigate El Salvador not so long ago, investigating El Salvador because they decided to try and free itself from the IMF. It didn't accumulate enough Bitcoin to have full sovereign autonomy. But remember, when they were actually doing investigations and pushing out papers there, investigating El Salvador for doing exactly what Cynthia Lummis is trying to get past. So will it get past? Will it not? I don't know. But remember, make sure you build your own Bitcoin strategic reserve so it doesn't actually matter, because the International Monetary Fund economic hitmen, like John Perkins told us in his job when he was an economic hitman for the Proof of Weapons Network, violently pushes countries in the direction of taking on their dollar debt. In fact, they launch wars just to make sure that you take on those debt, currency wars, as well as covert wars, as well as overt wars. And El Salvador has been a victim of those operations that led to guerrilla movements. And then the Proof of Weapons Network would fund gangs in order to make sure that the drug networks are still flowing so that they can get their own people in America through the CIA addicted to the latest drug as they look to benefit from these dark operations and covert operations that are funded by human trafficking, drug trafficking, and everything that comes through that to prop up the dollar in a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And so they may give you some of the surveillance stable coins from the Genius Act, and they may tell you who should regulate your holding of those stable coins and Bitcoin when you buy them through the Clarity Act, but you still have the freedom of being able to own it in self-custody. And they may not even give the American at the federal level their Bitcoin strategic reserve, because the Proof of Weapons Network, which is a global network now, may be doing to the US, as I've been warning, exactly what it did to the UK and it did to the EU. And I believe it's also doing to Israel as it vassalizes it into a collateralized debt obligation so that they can acquire private equity assets on the discount by managing the interest rates and the debt-based Ponzi scheme in order to maximize the value of their portfolio at BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to steal more money and steal more Bitcoin from you over these longer-term trends as well. So it was only last month that the Senate and Democrat members of the Senate introduced the bill, I think it was S2058, to essentially punish El Salvador President Nayib Bukele for buying Bitcoin and having a wallet where everyone could see and be accountable to his people that they were building an asset that everyone could audit online, and they were adding 1 Bitcoin to it. They were essentially demanding from El Salvador all of the wallet addresses, all of the exchange data, all of the probes and everything into sanction evasion and various other things, because they want to make sure that they maintain the control for the economic hitmen at the International Monetary Fund, so that they can ensure that their network is dragging people into debt and they don't become free, which El Salvador is trying to do. But the IMF is fighting back. At the same time, some of these deep state actors like Peter Thiel, he announced that he's going to be partnering with what's it called? Anduril Investments to form a new bank. So Peter Thiel, I was on X Spaces when he came up and tried to create a bank run on Silicon Valley Bank by telling everyone to withdraw so that he could purchase the bank on the cheap for $1, when Bill Ackman was coming up on Spaces and lobbying FDIC and the Federal Reserve to underwrite the whole banking system so they could buy the banks for free as they created that bank run. And now, because that operation didn't work out exactly the way, because it led to a shutdown and an FDIC takeover, instead, the technology companies that were trying to wage an internal struggle against the financial companies and the banks, he didn't get Silicon Valley Bank. It didn't go out the way that it wanted to. And so now they are going to basically launch a new bank, and they're going to be calling this bank, is going to be called Erebor. Erebor is the new bank. Now, remember Peter Thiel is the owner of Palantir. Yeah, Palantir that receives all that money and all of the data from Doge and all the data from IRS and all of the data from your healthcare records and all the different departments within America. He's going to pull it together in order to build that Palantir technology that was beta tested in Gaza and Ukraine and UK and Saudi and EU to usher in the surveillance state. This is the same person that's making sure he gets his bank as well. And so the owner of Palantir is making sure he's getting the bank, and he's creating this quasi system, and you can bet your bottom dollar is going to be in the stablecoin industry. So now we got Palantir, we got Erebor, and now we've got Anduril as well. All of these names, somebody told me, are actually from Lord of the Rings. So Peter Thiel is basically seems to be orchestrating some kind of surveillance state, some kind of shadowy financial system based upon stable coins that I think is the same model that Elon Musk is going to be creating and Trump is going to be creating through World Liberty Financial. So hopefully you end up with your self-custody as well. But he's basically branding surveillance, Palantir, defense, which is Anduril, and now finance through Erebor, and creating this twisted little network that you can bet your bottom dollar is going to be using stable coins and mass surveillance and data and security to combine it with wealth into this type of technocracy that we're moving to within America, that everything is adjusting to now that artificial intelligence is really, really becoming a thing. So you have limited time to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Utilize this shift to AI, hedge against your old job that may be going, earn as much fiat currency as possible, keep some of it in stable coins for spending, but save the rest in Bitcoin, so that you can then become economically powerful enough to beat the proof of weapons network with peaceful proof of work. So my advice is to try and avoid these things, buy more Bitcoin in self-custody. I'm going to be covering a little bit more of this. That's everything I've got for this week in Bitcoin in part one. But I'm going to be covering a little bit more on what Elon Musk is up to in the macro section in part two. And then I'm going to be covering more on the Epstein side in the geopolitical section in part three. It is all building on top of each other as we transition to this world of AI and Bitcoin and central bank digital currencies. So we're going to be moving into part two. Just before I move into part two, this week in macro, what Elon Musk is up to, the tariff policies, and what we got at the BRICS summit as we move to this multipolar world order, I'd like you to do me a favor. We are approximately 500 subscribers on YouTube away from 100,000 so that I can get a review from YouTube, so I can try and lift some of the shadow banning that's been happening, given the world has changed and they seem to want more data as well. So approximately 25% of the people that regularly listen to my videos are not subscribed. If those 25% of people all subscribed on YouTube right now, I'd be able to get through and I can keep giving this free content with no advertising. I don't do any advertising. I don't do any monetization. Bitcoin gave me all the freedom I need, and I don't have any type of agenda other than making sure you own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and you boycott the system and the proof of weapons network so that we can all benefit from it collectively as humanity, and you become the future economic powerhouses. I know so many Bitcoin millionaires and billionaires just because I've been giving this message and helping people invest in all the different companies over time. But now I don't need to do that. But I do ask for one thing: subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Get me over that 100,000 subscribers. We should be there any week now. And I just need the 25% of you that's doing that. Share this, put a comment as well. And I've got over 202,000 followers on X. I give live updates every day there as well. So follow me over there. And if this YouTube review goes wrong because they don't like what I'm going to be covering in part 2, in part 3, we're going to be going through the Epstein stuff, the truth about October the 7th, things that they don't necessarily want me to talk about. So if it all goes wrong, I've got Rumble as well. So you can follow me on Rumble. We're building a little bit of a following there. And you can go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can download and then you can watch this bit by bit on the move while you're driving, while you're at the gym. No extra time, net time. And if it all goes wrong, then we can back up to simondixon.com. So I put everything there. And if you would like free access to the simondixon.com membership portal, Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, you can sign up and create a login over there, and then you get my newsletter and I keep you up to date. Never selling anything. Just literally keep people up to date. Bitcoin gave me all the freedom that I needed, and I want you to be a part of that network as well. So make sure you got your login at simondixon.com. Then I can message you and you can get access to all the backup, whatever happens. So I'm just going to quickly have some water. And while I have some water, before we move to part 2, do me a favor, do a retweet, do a share. Make sure you get this out to people, do a like, whatever's needed to help the algorithm so that we can get that subscription above 100K. Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 89, part 2. We've already done this week in Bitcoin, and we went through why Bitcoin was at new all-time highs and everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, and compared it to what's happening in the fiat currency proof of weapons network. In part 2, I'm going to be covering the BRICS summit, what's happening with the tariff policies, what's happening with fiat currency and the proof of weapons network. And I'm also going to be tying that into the new political party and follow the money so that you don't fall the narrative of this American party that Elon Musk is launching. I'll give you my perspective on what I think he's actually up to that nobody else is covering. We're going to be covering all of that. And then in part 3, I'm going to be covering the geopolitical section, This Week in Geopolitics. And we're going to dive deep into the Epstein network, what happened with the Netanyahu meeting in the White House, and also what's happening, the latest in the Middle Eastern operations and the European operations of the proof of weapons network to steal more money from you by creating war and sacrificing people for the profits of the military industrial complex so that they can rebuild better and finance the rebuild and put it all into the technology of the financial industrial complex and the technology industrial complex. So America can print a new GDP and create more inflation and steal more money from the Americans. And then the inflation from the Americans will be much, much greater around the world so that they can try and suck up and persuade people to lend more money through the US Treasury market while we're transitioning to this multipolar world order. And that's what I'll be covering in this section. So let's start with oil. There was a meeting between the group of 8 of OPEC plus, OPEC plus and the group of 8 were projecting additional, basically, demand for $20 million, 20 million more barrels of oil are needed on top of their projections over the next 10 years. That requires an approximate, by all the OPEC plus countries. This is why Middle East and the OPEC plus are going to become the growth areas of the future, especially those that need the natural gas to power the artificial intelligence of this AI, Bitcoin, and central bank digital currency world we're moving to. It requires $27 trillion of investment just to build the infrastructure to provide those additional 20 million barrels and all of the gas and energy infrastructure for artificial intelligence. This is why we're having such a rapid, shift in narrative where the media no longer cares about climate change. So, BlackRock got their ESG, they got their investment, they got all the money that was printed by the ECB and the Fed to redistribute wealth there. Those industries are now moving over to reinvesting their profits in oil and gas, artificial intelligence, robotics, and everything that's going to take away your jobs. But give us, if you are hedged in the proof of work network, then hopefully you'll be able to beat this cycle that I've been trying to prepare everyone for. But anyway, at the conference, they were, I think it was in Vienna, Italy, and there's a large increase of demand that's coming. They were looking at what countries are the largest demand. The largest demand increase for oil is coming from Brazil. And the BRICS network, Russia, India, China, South Africa, that have built this mechanism for transporting oil between Iran, China, and Russia to circumvent sanctions, that are building these new payment rails. That is where they're seeing the demand coming from. And so while there is the petrodollar with Saudi Arabia, and they're doing more foreign direct investment to control the pristine artificial intelligence assets in America, they're doing backdoor deals so that the AI and data centers are hosted in the Middle East. And so all of these countries are hosting their data centers in their country, and they're buying the pristine assets so that NVIDIA is pumping up to the second largest asset in the world and doing reciprocal deals to bring the data over to the Middle East, as the Middle East and BRICS are going to be investing in the global South, and the global South are now resisting against their dollar colonization by saying, like Burkina Faso is doing, where they're saying, you can't have our resources, you can have our finished products. And you have to build factories here. And then China's building up the infrastructure network to provide those factories so that we can keep our margin rather than giving the margin to you. And the energy will be coming through these trade partners with the Gulf countries, the GCC, and all of these different networks are being built up in the multipolar world that we're transitioning to, that will lead to growth over the next decade in the Middle East, in the global South, as a result of taking on the dollar debt-based Ponzi scheme, as America becomes a regional power technocracy that will be focusing on its artificial intelligence, stable coins, and everything we covered in part one in this week in Bitcoin. So the price of oil recovered to where it was historically. It's around $70 again. And the conference was talking about the huge demand that will be needed for all the electricity to power this artificial intelligence. And the group of 8 oil producers are essentially quadrupled their expected oil supply increase. They met on Saturday. They made those announcements over the weekend, so it doesn't impact the price too much. But the estimates now is that there's going to be 548,000 barrels a day in August, and that was due to basically the market fundamentals. That will then go down a little bit, but this is a large increase in expectations. So at the same time as this happening, the Trump policy is to combat inflation by making sure that oil price comes down. And so there is an internal struggle between the goals of what America wants, the goals of these OPEC countries, and this is leading to some of the strategic negotiations and PowerPoints of why we are actually negotiating Iran nuclear energy deals, but framing it as nuclear weapons deals so that we can reset the map as the proof of weapons network in the US is losing power and the Middle East is decolonizing through these different types of trade deals that lead to foreign direct investment. And that's why BlackRock, with their proxy US under the Trump administration, implemented the tariff policy that we've been covering as well. Well, anyway, Trump is now pushing for unprecedented, never before seen interest rate cuts of 300 basis points. Now, we don't listen to Trump because he basically just says everything creates volatility in the market. The hedge funds on the inside track love it. But he is pushing for 300 basis points. That is 3 times bigger than the 100 basis point cut that happened on March the 15th, 2020, as a result of the ginormous money printing from shutting down the economy in COVID, where Trump ushered in Operation Warp Speed and got everyone vaccinated alongside all the censorship that happened to not let people know the consequences of that. That now we're finding in Congress was actually an intelligence operation that came from Western funding via Fauci to that biolab in Wuhan and resetting and the wealth redistribution that happened as a result of that ushered in the technocracy and everything that we're seeing right now. But anyway, this would be the large, if he got it, we're not saying he's getting it, but if he did get it, this would be the largest move by the Fed in history. And so if Trump actually comes through with his plan to implement a puppet Fed chair, then maybe, just maybe, it happens. And so Trump is going, because remember, the banks are the shareholders of the Fed, and Trump is more aligned with the financial industrial complex than any other president. You know, Biden was a military industrial complex neocon. Trump is a financial industrial complex type of guy for doing deals and working with banks. And that is reflected in, you know, if you look at Trump's funding, the largest contributor is Elon Musk from the technology industrial complex. The second largest was the Mellon banking family from the financial industrial complex, the legacy. And the third largest was Adelson, which is part of the neocon military industrial complex and Israel first type of financing, which is creating more problems in the Middle East. But the banks and the technocracy are kind of winning on top of that, which is why I think, he was basically the bidders were trying to outbid each other for different types of visions that we're seeing right now. But Trump is basically going for fiscal dominance. So this is the opposite of the narrative that Elon Musk was pushing around fiscal conservatism, you know, represented by people like Rand Paul, and Thomas Massie. And that is where Elon is trying to look at, you know, kind of his Doge brand, where he rebranded himself as a climate change left Democrat to a right-wing Republican in order to play this role to get access to all the Doge data. And now he is utilizing, as we'll be covering a bit more, his pretense that he cares about the national debt when we know how the dollar is structured. You can't pay it down. You literally crash the economy because the dollar is debt. And the banks would never allow for that $10 trillion at the Fed and the $10 trillion in the financial industrial complex to be paid down. They want to take all that interest. So, you know, Elon gets to play this role, and we'll go through a little bit deeper into what his role was anyway. But anyway, more of this we get to do. Trump gets to, by being fiscal dominant, you get to run your economy through fake GDP and crony capitalism. You get your one big, beautiful bill. You send that money over to the corporations in the stock market. GDP goes up and you get to stimulate the market and stocks reach new all-time highs. You get wealth redistribution, eventually leads to civil unrest, but you get to continue the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and you get to pass the hot potato on. So Trumponomics are the same as Bidenomics, but people pay Trump to make sure they get the money, which is a different flavor of paying Biden to make sure he gets the money. And so, you just get different alignment. This is why lobby is so important in order to follow the money, because it tells you so much more than listening to the media, which is controlled by the same lobbies anyway. So you're going to get an asset price boom. That is the model that we're moving towards. That is becoming clearer and clearer and clearer. It's got nothing to do with rebuilding jobs in America and various other narratives. It's got nothing to do with taking on the opioids by charging, Canada tariffs. These are all narratives to make you think that he's going to help you, while essentially Main Street loses money to Wall Street, and you have to hold the assets like Bitcoin, gold, or the different types of assets and stocks to try and beat yourself. And if you don't beat this, you end up a debt slave, and more people are there, which is why it's a problem. But the idea is to inflate away the value of the debt. In order to inflate away the value of the debt, you need inflation. Not just what we had of around 9%. You need like 15% to a high of approximately 40% in order to inflate away the debt through fiscal dominance. And so, this is clearly the type of strategy that it seems is becoming clearer and clearer that Trump is moving to. The tariff policy was about weakening the dollar, resetting the world order to the multipolar world order. Now you pivot away to this, and it seems fiscal dominance of inflating away the debt is the monetary policy, rather than reforming the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And so you essentially continue the debt-based Ponzi scheme. You get to refinance all debt through short-term bonds rather than long-term bonds. We talked about that a lot. And when you have short-term bonds, you can issue stable coins that we covered in part 1, and you can back the stable coin, buy this debt short-term, and then you can lever the short-term bonds because they're more liquid. And so therefore you can do similar things to what Liz Truss did in the UK through BlackRock, where they lever up the pension by using short-term debt as well. And so this is really moving to the emerging market distressed asset strategy that we've talked about previously. But you can achieve this by pushing the short-term rates down radically. And that is what Trump is pushing for right now. Maybe they have to wait until the Fed chair changes and you get the puppet. But it doesn't look like until that happens, you're going to get the reductions in rates that may come. And if they are minuscule, they probably don't have the biggest impact anyway. But if they are large, the longer term bonds will end up increasing because now they've reached 5%. And that 5% rate on the long term bonds is the first time it got to that point recently since 2007, which was the lead up to the global financial crisis. Now, the situation is different. I'm not saying there's a global financial crisis, but that was the last time the long-term rates were reaching these levels based upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme. So let's have a look at some of the auctions that have been happening. There was an auction this week, and it was a $58 billion 3-year bond auction. And it was basically a higher yield was paid. The auction sold out, obviously. It went into the reserve demand. But a higher yield was paid based upon this weaker demand in some of the Dutch auctions. And so that's pushed the rates up slightly. And that is what we're seeing. And that's on the 3-year bond as well. You'd have to pay a higher rate if you do the 10-year, the 20-year, and the 30-year bonds as well. Now, this week saw the deadline pass for the tariff extension. If you remember, you had Liberation Day on the 2nd of April. This was essentially about liberating the world from the dollar by resetting the world order into the multinational world order. I told you 3 things would happen. You'd have a distressed acquisition of local companies, consolidation to large multinational corporations. The second thing I said is that would happen on the export dependent countries as well. Distress there, consolidation through M&A into the larger multinational corporations, and you drive the world closer to BRICS and ASEAN and GCC and reset the world order into the multipolar world order that we're seeing negotiated right now. Now, once he started announcing these very, very high rates, he then capitulated and said, right, everyone's going to be on 10% for the next 90 days. And the 90-day deadline, I'm going to continue to negotiate with China. They had that negotiation. It went up, went down, and we had all that drama. Then we had negotiation with Canada and Mexico, the largest trade partners, bigger than China, with the US. And then we had the EU fight and all that type of stuff. But anyway, the world got more and more unstable. Relationships got reset. And now the 9th of July deadline for that 90-day passed this week. And Trump, as promised, sent out letters to everybody. And those rates weren't as high as Liberation Day, but they were higher than this 10%. So the rates have now become effective on August the 1st. So the letters went out, and you can play the destabilization game by extending these deadlines, which creates more and more negotiations, less and less reliance upon US, more and more weakening of the dollar, as we've been covering every single week. Or you can actually move to the tariff policy. Now, I believe that these tariffs are real. These are not negotiation tactics. This is really about resetting the world order, because I believe it's not Trump's strategy, it's BlackRock's strategy. And BlackRock, the stocks that have been invested with Middle East exposure, have been outperforming all the others. And BlackRock is invested in this multipolar world order as well. So what did we get this week? Well, we basically had letters going out, and we had some severe manipulation in the commodities market as well. So one of the things that happened this week is Trump's announced a 50% tariff on copper. Now, as US creates its own copper, this helps the commodity producers. And by not having a tariff, it means it's cheaper to purchase these commodities from US. This is good, sound policy. But it is inflationary because you get the 13% increase in price that happened as a result of this tariff, which makes every product that requires commodity as copper as a component to be a higher price. And then if it's still importing from abroad, then you get the 50% higher there as well. But, with commodities, this is actually helping keep things within America. So these commodity ones are, pretty good. Then you have the exemptions for the ones that require, other people. And the letters went out. So let me just give you some of the numbers. So rather than the 10%, there was a 25% tariff on Kazakhstan, 25% on Japan, which is a big problem for the Japan carry trade. And now Japan has been moving closer to further east rather than west. 25% on South Korea. That's a big problem. 25% on Malaysia. 25% on Tunisia. 25% on Canada, one of America's largest partners. 30% on South Africa, plus the potential of an additional 10% for being a member of BRICS. 36% on Cambodia. These are the export ones where you can consolidate them into the large multinational institutions. Bangladesh, 35%. Serbia, 36%. Indonesia, 32%, who formerly became a member of BRICS. 50% on Brazil. And at the same time, Brazil came out during this BRICS summit and had a lot to say about that, and signed essentially a 20-year trade deal with China. He came out saying no more American tariffs. Obviously, that is harder to perform as usual, but this is exactly how you make that transition. And so now you get a 20-year deal signed between Brazil and China, because essentially Trump, through his covert funding, is a BRICS salesperson. Brazil's president, Lula, basically called for BRICS to ditch the US dollar and said new trade currency is a must. Basically, came out and said it was a must, or will basically end the 21st century the same way we ended the 20th century. So this whole decolonization trend, harder, said than done. But this was exactly the desired impact, I think, of the tariff policy. Trump basically, during the summit, so this was all happening at the BRICS summit, Trump threatened an additional 10% tariff on any country that aligns themselves with anti-American policies to BRICS. He basically came out and said, quote, there will be no exemptions to this policy. Every country in the world basically trades with BRICS. So you've just got another 10% on top of that. So we'll see what this actually means. But then he later clarified that it's only members of BRICS. So let's see if that actually happens. Remember, as predicted, massive consolidation of distressed small business is happening. Private equity is happening. Main Street is consolidating as a result of these trends. The longer they go on for, the more consolidation you have. The same with the export-dependent current countries that are now getting these higher than 10% tariffs. That will cause distress, consolidation into the larger multinational corporations. This is how you get that fake GDP pump. You get covert wars that are being fired through tariffs. You get the weakening of the dollar, and you get this consolidation of wealth that gets big, beautiful bill prints that create inflation, and then that inflation leads to redistribution of wealth to the top from the bottom. And the third thing is obviously everyone gets closer to BRICS. Just to say, what is the benefit of this anyway? Well, the US in 2020, the tariff income was estimated, I think it came in at about $70 to $80 million. In 2025, billion dollars. In 2025, the income that we've seen so far is projected to be 350 billion. And if these tariffs hold, it will be larger. So just based upon if the current tariffs at the 10% level, you'd expect a 4 times increase in tariff revenue. Now, relative to the debt and tax income is not a blip in the sea. So it doesn't have the desired income, the desired policy, but it is a real thing. And so people saying it's just a negotiation tactic, no. You've had a 300% increase in tariff revenue, and it may go to 5% if we get these higher prices. We'll watch because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But it splits the world up into this multipolar world order, and you get some of this additional tax revenue from the tariffs, but you get more crony capitalism, a larger government, and these fake GDP print that creates wealth inequality and therefore systemic inflation that has to be significantly higher. OPEC, because OPEC is the exporters of oil. Now, America's energy independent. It makes its own oil. It's the largest oil producer, but it's got 350 million relative to 35 million people in Saudi. So they get to export more, and OPEC get a very, very important role in the future of this world order. So to usher that in, we had the 17th BRICS summit that was taking place in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. It was 2 days on June the 6th and June the 7th this week. I'll give you just some of the things that were announced. It was the first summit where all 11 full member states were actually in attendance. So before that, you had the 5 members, but now you've got the 11 full members. So BRICS Plus is now Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the original founding 5 members. And now you had Egypt as a full member, Ethiopia as a full member. So Egypt aligned with the GCC, Ethiopia in the global south, Iran that is now negotiating with America and the GCC, the decolonization of US so that everybody can harness their energy and rebuild this AI and robotics center within that. And you had Saudi Arabia there. Now, Saudi Arabia is not a full member, but they have been attending. They've been doing more trade outside of the petrodollar, and their largest customer is China. But at the same time, they're managing their foreign direct investment as they negotiate American decolonization, because they're going to be in the center of the world, and they get to have the forever war neocon model end if these negotiations with Iran and a Palestinian state can be formed. We'll cover more of that in the geopolitical section, how much further we're getting. But Saudi Arabia was in attendance, and full member United Arab Emirates as well, large sovereign wealth, and Indonesia, which is another Muslim Asian country, which is essentially along with all the other several partners. So what did they discuss? What did they announce? Well, the key highlights from the summit. Now, most people think of BRICS as a currency, but no, it's about forming trade routes that make sanctions irrelevant, so that then you can have multipolarity and be able to trade with the US, but not have the US treat you as a mafia, and de-weaponize the covert operations like the International Monetary Fund and various other United Nations weaponizations and the Securities Council and NATO and various other Western operations that were weaponized prior to this. So basically, they were calling for reforms in the international institutions like the United Nations, a source of soft power for America, the IMF, a source for soft power for America, and the World Bank, to be better partners with the global South and have more representation, which is why these foreign direct investments are happening, because you're investing and it comes with soft power. So, for example, Saudi Arabia paid off the World Bank debt in Syria so that it could have an IMF exit or a World Bank exit as well. So all of these deals are happening right now on the macro side. It reaffirmed at the summit as well its commitment to developing a cross-border payment system to reduce its reliance upon traditional global financial systems like SWIFT. Now, the payment system is different to having its own currency. There's no progress with the currency. They're working on SWIFT right now, and they've built all those networks and those rails. They've been using crypto. They've been clearing with Bitcoin across these different networks. They've been doing Bitcoin mining in order to build sovereign systems and then connecting them to the payment rails as well. Lula from Brazil, the president of Brazil, he was basically criticizing these unilateral global dominance and calling for this multipolar world order, essentially. There was lots of that narrative, but also politica comes in because Saudi's there. It's trying to manage its relationship with both China and US. So at the same time, there was lots of words from Trump and, during the summit as well. So Trump, as I said, he threatened to impose the 10% tariff on countries aligned with BRICS. We'll see whether that happens, what the impact is. But it is survival here. This is decolonization. The implementation of the most multipolar world order and being able to economically grow from this is too compelling. So I think it holds, which is why BRICS has become very powerful on both the diplomacy side and resetting these world order. Indonesia officially joined BRICS as a full member. So that was announced at the summit. This is basically the first Southeast Asian country to do so. That's the connection between BRICS, GCC, and ASEAN types of corridors, as they're all negotiating tariffs at the same time. This is how you reset into this world order. They condemn some of the military actions that's happening in Gaza. I'll cover more in the geopolitical section about the horrible, horrific things that are happening at the moment. I'll save that for the geopolitical section. They reiterated their support for a two-state solution. Israel, the colony of America, represented by the military-industrial complex faction of BlackRock, is negotiating trying to get as much strategic power through weaponizing genocides and various other things. But Iran, as a member, now expressed its skepticism about the effectiveness of this solution, as you would imagine, because Iran is engaging in these negotiations with the GCC US via its relationships. And there was an announcement that Vietnam and China have agreed to boost trade amongst each other, and there will be an investment in order to push forward their plans to begin the construction of a new, basically, rail link between the two countries of Vietnam and China that will start in December, is the plan. Brazil also took this opportunity to join South Africa in the genocide case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. So now you've got BRICS aligned members. You had Spain there from the European side. You also had Ireland from the European side as well. And you've got more and more countries that are joining the genocide case for the Palestinians of Israel via its proxy. And obviously, there's negotiations, as I've covered in the geopolitical section. That's where the Epstein stuff comes in. We'll save that for part 3. Trump basically put out a lot of rhetoric. He said BRICS was created to destroy the US dollar. Quote, he said, we're not going to lose the standard. It's not happening. It was, if we lost the world standard dollar, then this would be like losing a major world war. We would not be the same country. That's actually true, which is why Trump's investing in the Middle East and this multipolar world order, putting up Trump towers in Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia while borrowing money from ICBC, the largest bank in China, while doing stablecoin trades to bridge money from America, backing it up by US debt in the short term, and allowing these deals to go through with Binance to build real-world assets in the Middle East, all the things we've been covering in the past. And BRICS announced that it will launch a new investment platform that will facilitate trades integrated with BRICS Bank and some of these new corridors. There was also meetings at the same time between the ASEAN finance ministers, which is many of the countries that are really impacted in Southeast Asia by these tariff policies. Their finance ministers, they all met to develop a plan of how they're going to do business as a result of these US tariffs and how they can support each other in light. Now, Marco Rubio was attending that on behalf of the US, and the US and China had a meeting this week as well. That was in Kuala Lumpur. I think it was yesterday or today. Marco Rubio came out and made some announcement. He said that it was a productive meeting. They're looking to obviously announce more and more things. Now the world is being reset practically, but they want to pump the markets and sell some more debt by saying that we're winning. This is all about MAGA as they enter into this technocracy. And they talked about the possibility of having another summit between President Xi Jinping of China and President Trump of America. They were, of course, the announcements from Marco Rubio as ASEAN were doing that. They were the US was playing down the tariffs and the impact on relationship between other Asian countries. The fact that Japan is now having to do more moves away from America, focusing on inflation, removing the Japan carry trade, selling down its treasuries, increasing the value of the Japanese yen relative to the dollar, which takes away that Japan carry trade that they seem to be phasing out bit by bit. And the final part on the agenda today was about Palestinian rights as well. So the whole world is focused on making sure that that happens. And what else did we get from Europe? Europe again, weaker and weaker, consolidating more and more power into the European Central Bank, the European Union, that essentially all the politicians controlled by the proof of weapons network, with BlackRock as its CEO, as it profits from the technology industrial complex surveillance state, the financial industrial complex refinancing of Build Back Better, after wars and the military industrial complex taking all of the money away from the people. That European destabilization campaign, which is now being implemented on America by the same forces, is getting worse and worse. So Bulgaria came out and they announced that they will be adopting euros as of 1st of January 2026, removing away from their central bank and having full currency, and by handing over their currency and monetary policy to the European Central Bank. They'll be essentially the 21st country to switch over to a single euro currency. 21st currency, 21 million Bitcoin. And they're not protecting themselves with Bitcoin strategic reserves, because the ECB is the beta test for what they want to do in America. So basically, congratulations to Bulgaria for selling your soul and selling your sovereignty to the European Central Bank, financial terrorists, and the Proof of Weapons Network and the European Union. You'll basically just be a node operator for the wartime funding and the fake GDP prints of America, and you'll be paying the price with inflation at the expense of the European people and the Bulgarians. UK is basically experiencing right now, if you want to know what happens, a record outflow of wealthy individuals that are all leaving the UK in droves, leading the people to basically grow civil unrest. There's basically an estimated 16,500 high net worth individuals that will be leaving the UK by 2025. In fact, the exact stats came out. Apparently 9,000 approximate people have already left. I left the UK in 2015 because I could see where the writing was on the wall as the Proof of Weapons Network took over. And I wanted to make sure that I could build my proof of work, Bitcoin wealth, outside the UK system. And I had to, basically I saw where BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network was taking the UK. And it's really played out that way. Starmer, he might as well have an office in Lockheed Martin, because all he's doing is printing money and handing it over to Ukraine, who's got an agent, Zelensky, that works for Lockheed Martin, and supporting BlackRock as he met Larry Fink to refinance all of the UK's assets to make sure that US military companies get that money in the end, with all the corruption that happens in between. And that's the same Starmer that came after Julian Assange and created a fake sexual violence claim in order to take him out, that was taken away, all because he created WikiLeaks to expose Israel and the deep state and all the military operations that were happening as the Proof of Weapons Network killed over 1 million Iraqis on fake narratives of weapons of mass destruction. We'll be covering more of that in the geopolitical section. Anyway, this is the largest outflow of millionaires that pay the majority of tax in the world right now is the UK. And the highest inflow of millionaires that are taking all of that money and are going to be spending it without tax is going to the UAE. So all of the wealthy people are headed to the Middle East or to countries like Singapore in order to benefit, from the wealth that could be spent, which is going to take away the taxpayers. And you'll get more and more narratives of people saying, well, let's tax the rich, and they're implementing wealth tax. Wealth tax means that wealthy people leave, because by being a UK resident, you have to sell your real estate to pay your tax or borrow against it, or you have to sell your Bitcoin every year to pay some of the tax. And those that live outside will probably say, well, I'm not a resident, so I can only asset and I don't need to do that. So it drives everyone away, pushes away the tax income, and turns the UK into a distressed asset. And guess who would be buying that distressed asset? The wealthy people abroad. And now you hand over control through foreign direct investment And you end up having all of the alternative, like Qatar, who's buying more and more assets in the UK, and then they get political influence as the world changes. And this is what's essentially happening when you become controlled by the proof of weapons network. Let's jump into the final part that I wanted to cover in the macro section. And that's the whole, let's follow the money behind the Elon Musk story. So most people think, let's go through what the events that happened and leave people to believe this. So it was announced, obviously Elon carried on pushing as the big beautiful bill came through. They had their online fight talking about how America's going to be bankrupt as a result of the big beautiful bill. And then Trump was fighting back saying, yeah, Elon just wants some of our subsidies that I wouldn't give him. And so the online narrative happened until it ended in the accusation where Elon said Trump's reason he won't release the Epstein list, we'll be covering more of that in the geopolitical section, is because Trump's on it. And then that was ignored. And the Epstein case was closed. We'll go through why in the geopolitical section, and I'll make sure you understand what that operation was. But it started to ratchet up again this week, and the fight reignited again. And Trump basically came out and called Elon a train wreck. Elon Musk basically came out and said, quote, "What the heck was the point on Doge if the Trump administration was going to increase the debt by $5 trillion. And so basically, and all of the America people that agreed with that were excited by Doge, are now split. They're saying, well, Trump, you came out and did war and we were anti-war. You bombed Iran. So we're moving over to something else. You also did a $5 trillion stimulus. We thought you were going to be a fiscal conservative. So we're out. And also, you're increased the debt ceiling. So Elon is harnessing that. There's no Bitcoin strategic reserve. So Elon says, I'll do the Bitcoin strategy. So everything that were the broken promises is setting up for the next savior to fool Americans into thinking that this time it will be different. And guess what? This time it won't be different. So let's follow the money a little bit. There was a few more announcements as well. Elon announced basically after this, the formation of the American Party. Let's call it AP. So what is the American Party? It's a new political party. It's trying to break the two-party system. Elon Musk calls Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent basically a George Soros stooge who can't do basic math. And I've always been telling you that, you know, he is a part of the George Soros network, which is why he was installed as part of the proof of weapons network. But what is Elon Musk up to? So basically, I think that he's making a calculated move based upon an internal power struggle at the proof of weapons network. If you think about what's happening right now, Biden was a traditional neocon, mainly sponsored by the military-industrial complex, which is why you have the Israel strategy, forever war, escalation. But Trump is mainly a financial industrial complex pundit, and Elon is essentially a technical industrial complex pundit. So I believe that there's a little bit of power struggle at the top of the proof of weapons network. Now, obviously, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard own shares in all of them, so they can manage the portfolio. But what does Elon have? Elon essentially has his $350 billion. So he's in the proof of weapons network just by being a high net worth individual. I covered the AI summary of it last week. You can go to my blog on simondixon.com and get a little 10-minute, less than 10-minute AI summary of what the proof of weapons network is, or a longer 1 hour content just like this where I go through it. But essentially, his $350 billion fortune is one of the assets. He's the owner of Twitter with vast investments from the Middle East and various other members of the proof of weapons network, and BlackRock portfolio companies own part of that as well. So that gives him significant media asset. And he could basically use a new party in order to protect the tech empire. And so in negotiating, getting more money of, say, a big, beautiful bill for electric vehicle subsidies, which is what Trump was accusing him of, you could use this really to engage in those negotiations and try and get deregulation for the parts of the financial, technical, industrial complex, like stablecoins, and the military, industrial, technical, industrial complex like Palantir, away from the military industrial complex and away from the legacy financial industrial complex, by ushering in deregulation, by having some seats so that you can negotiate and you can utilize your lobby in order to control and represent the technical industrial complex. The Technocracy party might as well be what it's actually called. So I don't think he's out to save America from the $37 trillion debt. I essentially think that he's founded this party, and he's using narrative like the anti-uni party, i.e. Democrats and Republicans are the same. And he's saying, I will tackle the debt, which will crash America if he doesn't reform the money, so that he can harness what he's calling the 80% in the middle, so that he can get some more seats as well. I think it's just a populist movement, a new savior that's going to essentially say, well, Trump let you down. Now you need to move to this new party, and he can rally all the support and all of the votes for people that want to go to fiscal conservatism, want to harness the anti-war side as well. But I think he's basically just playing the 62% Americans that are worried about the deficit, as he calls it. I think there is a lot of people that are worried about the deficit. But as I said, he won't do the monetary reform, so he'll be the same. This is the new fake savior that's coming in. I think his real target is basically the financial industrial complex, legacy finance, that is worried about stablecoins, but is backing Trump right now. Because Trump is the debt-heavy $5 trillion spending bill, and it could threaten Elon's subsidies if he doesn't have that, which is what Trump was accusing him of as well. Basically, Trump is boosting bond markets. He's the legacy financial industrial complex guy. He's mainly funded by banks other than Elon. So you can't fix $37 trillion, but that did give him access to Doge, and Doge was a data play. And you can't take Doge and, save America because it had marginal improvements, because the real debt is interest on the debt, war, which doesn't decrease, Social Security, and Medicare, which are real liabilities that you can't really change unless you do something very controversial. So you can't fix the problem with tariffs and Doge, which was the whole pretense. So now let's say I'll take all of that and put it into a new party. He can't do the monetary reform unless he does. That would be great, but he won't. Because he's still going to back a lot of this debt through stablecoins, which is, I think, the goal of the technical industrial complex, and also usher in AI and cybersecurity as tools to gain more power from the military industrial complex. And so I think this is just a reform of finance. And I think that's the play that's happening here when you follow the money. Tesla depends upon a $500 million annual electric vehicle credit. He also relies on SpaceX having a $1 billion contract with the Pentagon. So he needs to get some more power over that. So he's not coming after the debt. He needs those subsidies. He's not going to sacrifice his share price for it. And he won't be able to through his fiduciary duties as well. But both of them are tied, and all of his plays are tied to government budgets and increasing the debt. And so cutting spending just won't help his bottom line or what he represents as well. And I believe he also wants to launch stablecoins on X. I think he may merge X, which is the data play, with Tesla, which is the driving data play, the robotics play, with XAI, which is the data play and the social security play. Maybe he'll merge them all into Tesla, and maybe he'll combine that with the data play and the social credit score and the financial play, which is why we had the advertising CEO of X step down. I think it's going to be replaced by a financial industrial complex player. I think it's going to be a crypto, a Bitcoin play, a stablecoin play, and it's all part of ushering in the technocracy. And that stablecoin will be backed by ever-increasing debt until there's civil unrest and the system breaks. So it's essentially, I think, a way of getting more and more of the budget over to the technical industrial complex, and to reshape any of the future bills. If there is some kind of austerity as a result of it, then it could lead to the deregulation that's needed. And he could control some of the deregulation by ushering in his voting power in his base as well. So that's what I think is actually happening as well. It's essentially a stablecoin attack on the legacy financial industrial complex, which even if banks launch stablecoins, it makes less money than fractional reserve banking. And it's a play to build in the social credit score, combine the data, and basically it could be a way of doing radical monetary reform by backing debt by the stable coins while having a speculative attack on the legacy banks in order to transition potentially and shift from a bond-heavy financial industrial complex based upon the Federal Reserve System to a technical industrial complex, R&D grants, and basically stable coins. But the narrative will be fiscal conservatism, but it's complete BS. That won't actually happen. I think it's just about shifting power, and I think it's a struggle. And this is exactly how the proof of weapons network works. It's a decentralized, unaccountable network that is involved in an egotistical power struggle, but setting the agenda without any of the democratic forces, as well as the deep state criminal networks that I've covered. And you can see the blog on the proof of weapons network. This is a way of the technology industrial complex getting an upper hand. And these are the types of power plays. And I think Elon's just betting on his assets as well. BlackRock, as I said, will benefit from everything. They'll hedge as well, the different moves. They're shareholders in all of them. They benefit from the volatility. BlackRock has approximately 7% of Tesla, 8% of Lockheed Martin. So it's hedged whichever way it goes, and it can play the game as well. And Elon might get, let's say it gets 1 or 2 seats. And that could be a powerful tool in shifting the power play. It doesn't mean he's actually going to become, the new government or anything that's going to happen, but it could be enough to shift overall policy and create a dependency. And the financial industrial complex right now is currently on the top. But I think this is a power play and the types of things that I've been covering in the proof of weapons network. And so that's going to be everything that I'm going to do in part 2 this week in macro. You see how the news flow is absolutely wild. And we're going to be moving over to part 3 this week in geopolitics. So as a quick recap, this week in Bitcoin, we covered the fact that Bitcoin is reaching new all-time highs, and how to protect yourself from some of the forces that are happening in the dollar and the proof of weapons network and the stablecoin standard and the new Clarity Act and everything that will be coming with Bitcoin strategic reserves and the different plays. In part 2, we covered the BRICS summit. We covered the Trump tariffs and the latest. We covered what's happening in Europe. And we covered what I think the real play between following the money in the Elon Musk and Trump drama, and what it actually means for the proof of weapons network. Now in part 3, we're going to be digging deeper into the Epstein drama and how that relates to everything that's happening this week in geopolitics, and combine it all together. So just before I move to part 3, do me a favor. I need to get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Head over to YouTube. 25% of my regular listeners that watch us to the end, are not actually subscribers. So if you're enjoying this content and you're watching it to the end, please subscribe and help me get that review, so that I can try and undo some of the shadow banning that's been happening, because YouTube doesn't share my content and I rely just upon you. At the same time, if that review goes badly, follow me on X, because I stream over there, and I also go live and do live updates every day, and you can come up and ask me a question on a space if you follow me on X, and you'll get that notification. Also, Apple podcast and Spotify podcast, you can download this. If it's too much to watch in one chunk, you can break it up and watch it bit by bit. And when you open the app, it will come back. On Spotify, it does it in video format as well, not just listening in the podcast. And you can also follow me on Rumble in case I get shut down on YouTube. And if you'd like a newsletter notification, additional stuff, head over to simondixon.com. You can find some of those blogs where I went through some of the AI summaries, and I'm going to be doing more AI summaries in the Geopoliticals section. And you can see and read all the blogs and get it in all the different format if you want to dig deep into a different topic. Trying to create as many resources. And of course, in case everything goes down, we got our own server backup, which is the membership portal, simondixon.com. And you can become a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. You get a login, you get an email, and I'll send you all the details. So that's everything for this week in macro of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 89. We're going to be moving over to part 3. Do me a favor, like, share, subscribe. I'm going to take some water, and I'll be back in a second so that we can do part 3. Welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 89, part 3, this week in geopolitics. Epstein files are no longer needed, apparently. We're going to dive deep into why. I'm going to make sure that you understand the Epstein operation, and I'm also going to combine it with everything that happened this week in geopolitics. So we're led to believe President Trump had, in his administration, the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation concluded that Jeffrey Epstein had no client list and that he committed suicide, even though there was 1 minute of footage missing, even though that was footage that wasn't related to the time of the alleged killing, which is obvious because he was an intelligence asset, and he did have all sorts of blackmail on very prevalent members of the Trump administration at the top, and he does have all sorts of things that the proof of weapons network banksters definitely don't want you to see. Wexner, Jamie Dimon, and all the other people that if you head over to my blog on simondixon.com, where I link to the Epstein client list from the settlements and all the people that we will know from the testimonies of the victims from the Epstein sex trafficking ring in order to gain blackmail over influential politicians, that is still live today, and the blackmail still exists. But the file has to be closed because there's nothing to see here. There is no blackmail. It's not connected to intelligence. He committed suicide, and he was just a dirty pervert, which he was, but also doing the bidding of the proof of weapons network, particularly the military industrial complex faction of Mossad that is connected to that. But the MAGA community split at the same time as Elon Musk coming in and taking and capitalizing upon the split. So basically, this was announced. Trump promised it. And now he had this drama, if you remember, where he invited all the influencers to come to the White House and gave them the binders and said, we've given them the Epstein file and they're going to be releasing it. And then suddenly Kash Patel, whose girlfriend is a ex-member of IDF 8200 intelligence and Mossad, said nothing to see here. And Bongino, who's an influencer connected to Zionist network, said nothing to see here. And Pam Bondi, a Zionist, said, oh, there is no file anymore, even though I said it's on my desk and I'm going to reveal it to you. That absolutely, and the crimes against humanity that have been committed as part of this network, absolutely disgusting. And they're involved in the complicity of making sure that the victims never get justice for everything that happened. And to add salt to the wound, Netanyahu and Trump decided that they would have a meeting in the White House the next day after the Epstein files were not released. So I'm going to go through and make sure that you have an understanding of what this operation was. And if you want to dig deeper and get the actual Epstein list, I created a blog on simondixon.com. You can openly go there. You don't even need to have a login. And you can read that. And it links to Ryan Dawson's video with the Epstein list that's done the most amount of work and an overall summary of everything you need to know. So you don't have to wait. And you can see what is being covered up by the Trump administration and the FBI, because they are just proxies of the proof of weapons network anyway. So during this White House visit, Netanyahu and Trump basically had some talks, and by the end of it, no ceasefire was agreed in Gaza. So they told us that there is no ceasefire yet, but they did give us some guidance. And I'll go through a little bit of what happened this week. But what I want to do right now is I want to make sure before we go, because I got a couple of AI summaries, if time permits, and then I want to tie it all together into everything that happened this week, so then we can then get ready for what's coming next week. But I need you to understand what the Epstein network is. So even if you don't go over to my blog, I've got like a 5-minute AI summary that we're going to play right now, where I took some videos and all the clips that we put together, my team put together, and you can go watch the full video if you really want the evidence and all of the actual people and names and everything. But I put together an AI summary so that at least you can have that, so that you understand what this actually is, because the proof of weapons network isn't going to tell you. So Azad, let's play the first AI clip that goes through the overview of the Jeffrey Epstein blog and video.
Okay, think about this for a second. The Department of Justice, the FBI, they announced the Epstein investigation is closed. Suicide, no list. Done. And this happens the very same day Prime Minister Netanyahu is meeting President Trump, right there in the White House.
Yeah, the timing is, well, it's certainly noticeable, isn't it?
Exactly. So today, we're going to use that sort of striking coincidence as a jumping off point. We're diving deep, looking at some, let's say, controversial claims about how these huge stories might actually be something else entirely, like maybe intelligence ops.
And the perspective we're tapping into here is from Simon Dixon. Now, many know him from, Bitcoin, alternative finance. He was really early on that. But what's interesting is how he connects the dots: economics, finance, tech, geopolitics. He has a track record of seeing big shifts coming.
And his take on Epstein is, well, it's out there.
It is. He argues it wasn't just a sordid sex trafficking case. He claims it was fundamentally an international intelligence operation.
Okay, so that's a huge claim, not just trafficking, but blackmail. A sophisticated operation to control powerful people. What's the link? Where does he get that from? And just to be clear for you listening, we're exploring Dixon's viewpoint here, reporting on it, not necessarily saying it's fact.
Right, absolutely. So from Dixon's perspective, one key piece is Alex Acosta, Trump's former labor secretary. Acosta apparently said back when he was a U.S. attorney that he was told to back off Epstein. Why? Because Epstein belonged to intelligence and was, quote, above my pay grade.
Above his pay grade, meaning connected way higher up than a prosecutor would normally handle.
That's the implication Dixon draws, and he connects that to other testimony suggesting Epstein was an agent for Israeli military intelligence, and that Ghislaine Maxwell, she was allegedly an Israeli spy, his handler.
A handler. So their mission wasn't just personal depravity.
According to Dixon, no. The mission was specific. Entrapping powerful people. U.S. politicians, judges, big names, corporate leaders get compromising material, blackmail. It was, as Dixon puts it, a professional blackmail operation from day one, a tool for leverage.
So if Epstein and Maxwell were running this kind of operation, how does Dixon see their actual role? It sounds like Epstein wasn't just some rich guy who went bad.
Exactly. Dixon paints him as an actor playing a part, an imposter billionaire.
Imposter, meaning the wealth wasn't really his.
That's the suggestion, that his real salary was, well, access to teenage girls, and the benefits were the mansions, the private jets, the whole setup.
And his homes, reportedly filled with pinhole cameras. Epstein himself apparently admitted, I record everything.
And the FBI raids seemed to back that up, right?
Yeah.
Finding binders, CDs, hard drives.
Yes, exactly. If true, that level of meticulous recording, it points directly towards blackmail, doesn't it? It's not just random home videos.
Okay, so if there are recordings, potentially terabytes of compromising material, who gets it? Who benefits from this alleged operation? Dixon's claim is pretty direct here. He suggests the recordings, the videos, were sent to Israel for use in blackmail operations. And who does this network ultimately serve? He uses the term, the architects of the global war machine.
What it usually means.
Generally, yeah, the military-industrial complex, that whole ecosystem of defense contractors and government, plus intelligence agencies, CIA, MI6, Mossad, groups Dixon claims thrive on conflict and secrecy.
It sounds like a massive operation. But who's pulling the strings? Dixon mentions Les Wexner, Epstein's supposed patron. Wexner's still walking free. What's Dixon claim about his role?
Dixon alleges Wexner is, quote, 100% Israeli intelligence, and that he provided Epstein with key assets like that huge mansion, apparently for just $1, and a Boeing 727 jet.
A whole Boeing jet. Just
given. That's the allegation. And Dixon further claims Ghislaine Maxwell actually answered to Wexner, not just Epstein, which suggests, a deeper operational structure. If true, Wexner as a key figure, maybe the key figure behind Epstein.
And Ghislaine Maxwell. Dixon also brings up her father, Robert Maxwell, the British media tycoon. How does he fit into this picture?
Ah, right. Dixon highlights claims that Robert Maxwell himself was a Mossad double agent. He points to the fact Maxwell got a state funeral in Israel attended by Israeli leaders. There are also allegations, which Dixon repeats, that after Robert Maxwell died, his spying records were moved to Epstein's house for safekeeping.
Wow. So the implication is Ghislaine was following in her father's footsteps.
Dixon suggests she was very like her father indeed, performing an extraordinary service. It paints a picture of potentially a multi-generational intelligence connection, adds another whole layer to this alleged international network.
So if you take Dixon's claims at face value, just for a moment, the alleged outcome is pretty staggering. He's suggesting the U.S. essentially lost its sovereignty, that its leaders became compromised through blackmail.
That's the core implication, yes. That external influence through this kind of leverage fundamentally warped decision-making at the highest levels.
It's a lot to take in. What do these kinds of claims, these narratives about covert ops and hidden influence, suggest about the world we think we know?
Well, Simon Dixon's consistent message is really about critical thinking. He urges you, the listener, to question the official stories, to be skeptical of mainstream narratives. He often claims the media itself can be, let's say, an agent of deception. So his work encourages you to look beneath the surface, always.
It definitely makes you think, what does it mean for us, for society, if some sources are out there saying the truth gets deliberately buried by propaganda, dissent silenced? How does even considering that possibility affect how you understand what's happening right now? Somebody to chew on.
So I hope you enjoyed the little AA summary. I'm not sure I can even use the word enjoy for such a dark subject. But this is how the proof of weapons network works. This is what it's backed by. This is what the dollar is backed by. You need to print fake GDP in a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And in order to do that, you need more war. In order to get more war, you need to blackmail and you need to install puppets, and you need the people to believe that they make a difference and they actually vote actually matters. When politicians are installed in order to achieve certain goals, just like the proof of weapons network allowed the Trump administration and President Trump to play president and get rich from deals while he ushered in the multipolar world order and used all the different things that were discussed between Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump for both of them being blackmailed by the military-industrial complex that actually ultimately controls the power strings and those that end up using policy to push share price. And that's how this proof of weapons network works. And it backs up the dollar. And that's why we resist with peaceful proof of work. But anyway, if you haven't watched it, by the way, look up the paintings that were found at Jeffrey Epstein's houses or estate. One of them was a picture of President Bill Clinton wearing blue dress by Monica Lewinsky and red high heels, as part of making sure that Epstein had all the leverage to make Oslo Accords fail, so there would never be peace in the Middle East, because Israel is a colony of America to destabilize the region and create the forever war for the profits of the military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and now technology industrial complex that is actually doing genocide as a service and occupation as a service, and integration into drones in Gaza, Ukraine, West Bank, and then beta testing that surveillance as a service on UK, in Saudi Arabia, and also in European Union. But that's why this is multi-president. Don't think that it changing the party and changing the leader changes the game, because they select them. What about the picture of George Bush Jr. sat in front of his desk in the White House looking like a schoolboy with a paper plane with 2 Jenga towers fallen down in front of him? What about that operation? We're going to be we'll dig deeper into that by the people, if you haven't followed the money on that one. All of the short trades, all of the insurance contracts that were taken out, who they were taken out by, the third tower that came down, all of that stuff. You don't think your government and your proof of weapons network is able to be bribed or even voluntarily get rich in order to make such crimes against humanity happen, so that they can weaponize religion in order to justify wars and make you think that a group of people are completely different because they fund a group of people like ISIS and Al-Qaeda through USAID and make you think that that represents a religious group, so that you can then classify them as terrorist groups while you're funding them to destabilize countries and take over those countries if the IMF proof of weapons network doesn't manage to destabilize them and turn them into a vassal state. So you end up with the petrodollar and propping up the dollar so that you can create more debt and tell the whole world that you're simply expanding democracy. This is why we need multipolarity. And that's why those pictures exist in the Epstein house. Still think it's a conspiracy. All right, well, what happened in the White House? Well, Trump and Netanyahu, both trying to get their freedom from those that control them. Well, not their freedom. They're pretty complicit anyway. They don't really care. But they reiterated kind of the Abraham Shield plan, which is the worst case scenario. The plan that's not going to happen. The ones where they think they can ethnically cleanse the Palestinians and just say Israel will continue the illegal occupation. He reiterated that. And Prime Minister Netanyahu decided that because Trump publicly said Netanyahu's a war hero and was helping him in making the ICJ court case go away and the corruption within Israel go away, because he didn't need to, instead, when he was at the White House, he got to go there instead of going to court and face his crimes, if you haven't watched the BB files. And because Trump is saying that Netanyahu's the best guy in the world, Netanyahu had to return the favor. So Netanyahu said, Israel is nominating you, Trump, for the Nobel Peace Prize. During, just so you know, just like Obama, who created war after war during his administration, let's look at who the nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, Trump and the Trump administration, What operations has he actually engaged in? So between 2017 and 2021, as well as 2025 until present, the US under the Trump administration has basically committed airstrikes and bombings in 8 nations: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, Libya, Iran. Now, those just happen to be all the lists that are on the clean break memo that was written by the military-industrial complex, that apparently 9/11 happened and there were weapons of mass destruction that never turned up, that led to trillions of dollars being printed by the Federal Reserve so that Americans could pay the inflation so that that money could go back to military companies that control the deep state. And maybe there's nothing to this. Maybe these are just files that need to be put away. Or maybe the people investigating the files are the same people that are on the files. Or maybe the administration, or maybe Israel, or maybe all of them, or maybe the banksters that are financing all of this stuff. Maybe they're all on it. Because the reality is Trump blackmailed? Is Netanyahu blackmailed? Of course they are. They're both trying to bury their blackmail and all the skeletons in the closet. You don't get to be a millionaire tycoon in New York and do deals that get you Trump Towers without sitting down with the dregs of society and engaging in some kind of laundering and have parties and be friends with Jeffrey Epstein without playing some funny games in between. Whether you do the bad or the worst, you'll still be in the operation because that's the whole idea of the operation. So of course they're blackmailed. But is it that Israel rules the world? Is it that Trump is being blackmailed by Netanyahu? Remember, we covered this in previous episodes. Israel is plausible deniability so that when America and the military-industrial complex needs to divorce against its crimes from humanity, they can just simply blame Israel and say that wasn't me, even though it was them, but all the money went back to America, and Americans would not like to know that their government profited from all this stuff. So it allows Israel as just a proxy for the US colony, which is a US as a proxy for the proof of weapons network. And the proof of weapons network is broken up to faction, including the military industrial complex that controls the deep state. The deep state control both Israel and America. Politicians are simply middle management. And you can either blackmail them, or you can pay for them to be there, or you just make them rich. And I don't think Trump needs blackmailing at this point, because in my view, blackmail hasn't actually been needed. Trump is getting incredibly wealthy. He's tripled his net worth from my estimations, just based upon the deals that I've already seen. So he's already aligned with the financial industrial complex. He's already serving as their proxy president. And that's what's different between him and Biden. Biden was more military industrial complex. Netanyahu is a proxy for the military industrial complex. This is the US proof of weapons network. That's who controls the blackmail. That's who has the illegal weapons of mass destruction in Israel. That's who controls whether the Samson operation happens, and everything we've other covered. This is how the US proof of weapons network works to prop up the dollar. You manufacture conflict. You basically stage controlled, events. You then, in doing so, get to keep propping up the debt-based Ponzi scheme of the dollar. And that is the system when the Federal Reserve System was implemented. You can then essentially have American global dominance until competing forces, because the companies that own all of the assets and all of the shares in America, they become global institutions. And just like when the Bank of England needed to ditch Britain by getting it into debt, you can reset the world order, and then you have America are not America first. Those that control the UK are not UK first. Those that control Europe are not Europe first. And even when you think about it, those that control Israel are not Israel first. What do? They weaponize Judaism in order to create this terrorist ideology called Zionism that recruits an army to sacrifice the people by radicalizing them in getting them to ethnically cleanse Palestinians so that the money doesn't stay in Israel. It's not a normal state. The money goes back to the proof of weapons network and props up the dollar. So corrupt people get to make a bunch of money, and then they get you to do illegal settlements, weaponize you to engage in state-sponsored terrorism. Eventually they get to blame you, ditch you, and you're just a radicalized person that then needs to try and get on with your neighbors eventually. So you end up leaving and going back to the same country that used you as a useful idiot in the first place. And most people are so radicalized that they don't even know that that's happening because they think America is like their best friend. They can't see through the whole thing because it's one ginormous money laundering criminal proof of weapons network to prop up the dollar. The people that are running you are the very same people that have not got your interest as well. So what have been produced by this proof of weapons network? And then I'm going to do one more AI summary to understand you how dark these operations are willing to go. So obviously October the 7th was the justification for annihilating every infrastructure in Gaza so that it can be rebuilt as a technical industrial complex, financial industrial complex, after the military industrial complex make a load of money, and it can usher in the surveillance state and beta test the technology that they're using, that they're claiming in America is for borders, but is actually for utilizing against the American people, just as the UK government did against the UK people. But in this whole operation of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians with the proof of weapons network, the US-backed proxy Israel has killed, on average, more than one child every hour for the last 24 hours a day for 637 days in Gaza. And we don't even know the real stats. I think the real stats will be worse. So when people say, what's the intrinsic value behind the dollar? You can say one child death per hour. You see why I support peaceful proof of work? You see why I want to boycott the Federal Reserve System? If people knew this, if people understood the severity of the lie, and that's what's happening right now. That's why they need the surveillance state, because technology is giving us these bottom-up movements, and then even weaponizing that right now. They're making sure everything we talk about is being used in the algorithm. And we got no choice but to usher in this other than build some self-sovereign with Bitcoin in self-custody so we can boycott the system. Because the system's going to turn on itself, just as proof of work did. The system's going to turn on itself just as artificial intelligence eventually does. The system's going to turn on itself when we build the technology for decentralized identity. And we need to make sure that we're allocating our money and we're not supporting that system as much as we can. Now, obviously, if you're more effective, you're going to have to engage in AI. So there's an element of subjectivity. But we've got to realign our ethics and values by controlling the money and understanding how to do that. This is why I'm passionate about this message getting out to as many people as possible. So what does the US do? Well, in every United Nations meeting, it veto votes against Palestinian freedom while telling the Americans that it cares and it's negotiating a deal so that the Americans can feel like they're not involved in this. And even this week, they sanctioned the United Nations special repertoire or reporter because she was using her voice against the Israel genocide. The US called basically there's an operation that's happening right now that was being exposed because I covered this in previous broadcasts. There's an organization right now called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that WikiLeaks exposed as a US funded operation that is executed by Israel via a Swiss company. And that operation is being used in order to create what is now being called killing camps. And those killing camps are concentrating people together to queue for food as they go through starvation campaigns. And they're just massacring randomly civilians that's got nothing to do with Hamas. Israel is now, via its, Israel as a proxy of the US military industrial complex, via its controlling colony US, is concentrating Palestinians into one location. They're shutting down the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation points to deliver. They're bombing the entire north to force everyone, concentrate everyone into one camp. And where they can do random massacres. So they're closing all aid points. And they're putting them all in Rafah, on the border, where Egypt has already said we will not engage in the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians because we know if we open that border, which Israel controls as well, they're never coming back. And so Egypt is holding that because they're negotiating with the GCC, as I've already said, diplomatic decolonization from the colonizer, the US proof of weapons network. And they have to do that because China came in and normalized with Iran. And in order to have this vision for the Middle East, Saudi has to get on with Iran. And Iran is saying, we will only stop supporting the resistance against Western terrorists like ISIS and Al-Qaeda if Gaza is free. And obviously Iran has its own interest as well, which are attached to that. So not everyone's angels, but now everyone is aligned. But Netanyahu is trying to buy his freedom, and they need to push narratives to you to make you think that you're the good people while they negotiate with concentration camps and genocide in order to try and get as much strategic leverage as possible so that the BlackRock and the proof of weapons network can manage as much investments in the rebuild, build back better that support their technical companies, support Palantir, and support, if Lockheed Martin's going out, then we need more debt here. And we need our banks to finance this as well. And we want to do that. And there's a power struggle at the top that I covered in the macro section as well, because that's what this thing is really all about. That's what it's all about. And once you know it, you can resist against it. So the United Nations, the members that aren't part of the Security Council, they issued a warning and called this the second Nakba. And the second Nakba is being implemented through concentration camps. Never again is being inflicted by the country that said it was created for never again against the people that did the first genocide in Europe, that created this army that is now radicalized and dehumanized to the point where just since this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation US-backed operation inflicted by Israeli IDF soldiers has already led to 800 massacres while they're queuing for food in the starvation campaign just over the last few weeks. And we had massive bombing all over the northern Gaza to drive everyone down to the south, to concentrate them into these camps. How is this justified? It's justified because of Operation Mockingbird, where the deep state, MI6 Mossad, I've covered this in previous episodes around how the Proof of Weapons Network was set up and how Operation Mockingbird was used to control the media, and CIA was a manifestation in Operation Paperclip of Nazis, the Jewish mob and the Italian mafia. And that was used in order to combine with budgets printed by government through the banksters. And they use that in order to control the media, to make you think that something completely different is happening. And how do they do that? They try and make you think that the people they're killing are atrocious. They're animals. How do they do that? By connecting it with the operations that they fund. Mass sexual violence, the very same things that these blackmail networks are set up to create these trafficking rings and make you think that it's somebody else. Pure gaslighting. So what I want to do right now is make sure, before we sum up the final things and we close this episode, I created one more AI summary around a blog that I hope you've watched right now, that helps you understand how atrocity propaganda works by digging into one use case of atrocity propaganda that led to the full justification of everything that's happening right now, where the media is telling you something's happening, which is why 100 BBC journalists retired and said, we are told that we have to put out this propaganda as pro-Israel propaganda. And so I'm going to play a video right now based upon one of the blog where I summarized a documentary from a guy called Max Blumenthal, and the AI goes through the summary, because I want you to, at least, if you haven't watched the documentary, at least understand how an atrocity propaganda operation works and question with an open mind exactly how you know what you think you know happened on October the 7th. So Azad, let's play the next AI summary.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex information, helping you get truly well-informed. Today, we're diving into a really sensitive and crucial topic, the events of October 7th, 2023, and specifically the narratives that emerged very quickly afterwards, focusing on claims of what the sources are calling atrocity propaganda. That's the deliberate use of exaggerated, maybe even fabricated stories of horrific acts, usually to manipulate public opinion, often to dehumanize an enemy. Our sources for this deep dive are Simon Dixon's introduction and his blog, which relate to the documentary Atrocity, Inc. by Max Blumenthal.
And our mission here is really to explore how information can be shaped, how it's disseminated. We'll be scrutinizing some widely circulated claims by looking at what was later reported, or sometimes even contradicted, by official sources. And this raises a big question for you, the listener. How do we actually discern truth when information itself is weaponized?
Okay, let's unpack this then. Immediately after October 7th, these widespread, pretty shocking claims started circulating everywhere. We all heard reports like 40 beheaded babies, claims of mass sexual violence. What do the sources say about, where these specific claims started?
Well, it's crucial to trace the origin. And the sources suggest a pattern. That 40 beheaded baby story, for example, it was first broadcast by an Israeli channel, I-24. Their American correspondent cited just one source, a single Israeli soldier, David Zion. And he wasn't just a soldier, he was also a political leader of an illegal settlement group, one known for inciting violence.
Wow. Okay, and then these claims just exploded, right? Mainstream media, CNN, CBS, even President Biden repeated them. But here's where the sources say it gets really interesting. These specific claims, they were later walked back and retracted by the Israeli army itself, their government press office. As you mentioned, even the Biden White House walked them back. What about other sensational stories that the sources find more?
Oh, absolutely. The narrative didn't just stop there. Other really lurid stories emerged, amplified by figures like Yossi Landau from the Zaka organization, that's an Israeli volunteer rescue group. The sources note Landau, well, he lacked forensic credentials, but openly admitted using his imagination to describe torture scenes, things like children burned to death.
And the financial angle here, What did the sources uncover about that? Because Zaka was reportedly almost broke before October 7th, right?
That's right. And then donations just skyrocketed. Over $13 million came in very quickly. There were even reports, pretty disturbing ones, that Zaka volunteers might have rearranged corpses to exaggerate the horror, for potential donors.
Did it?
And another story that circulated widely but was debunked involved a baby baked in an oven, a claim the sources say seems specifically designed to evoke the Holocaust, really contributing to dehumanizing the adversary.
So these stories shaped perception, but the sources also point to issues with the basic numbers, right?
Yeah.
The casualty figures.
Exactly. Initially, it was reported as 1,400 deaths. That number was later officially revised down to 1,200. And confirmations came out that hundreds included in that initial count were actually uniform Israeli soldiers. And also Palestinians, fighters, and average citizens, too, caught up in the initial count.
And the sources bring up something called the Hannibal Directive, a controversial military procedure.
Yes, very controversial. It was once secret. It basically authorizes the Israeli army to kill not just captors, but their own soldiers, their own civilians, to prevent them from being taken hostage. There are accounts, including one from a survivor at Kibbutz Be'eri, describing an Israeli tank shelling a home.
A home filled with Israeli civilians held captive.
Yes, killing 12-year-old twins in that instance. Israeli media and officials have, since then, actually admitted to enacting this directive.
That adds a whole other layer to understanding the initial reports and how the narrative shifted.
Definitely. And as international support for Israel's military response started to, dwindle, the sources show a new narrative taking center stage, this time focusing on systemic rape by Hamas. The pollster Frank Luntz heavily influenced this, apparently finding that stories of raped civilians caused the most outrage. And you saw high-profile figures like Sheryl Sandberg, Hillary Clinton, championing this narrative. The sources even mentioned the use of what they term crisis actors in some promotions.
Right, and major outlets like the New York Times ran with these stories, based on sources like Yossi Landau again and anonymous accounts, but these were later contradicted.
Widely contradicted, yeah. By official kibbutz spokesmen, by a lack of forensic evidence from police investigations. Even the family of Gal Abdush, her story was used as a symbol of these horrors. They publicly denied she was raped. They said the timeline just made it impossible.
Wow.
And the sources even state Sheryl Sandberg's documentary used what they call violently coerced false confessions from Palestinian prisoners.
So connecting this, there's another side the sources bring up, about the Israeli prison system.
Yes, an Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, reported on how the prison system transformed after October 7th, calling them de facto torture camps. They cite testimonies, even video evidence, of gang rape of Palestinian men by Israeli soldiers.
Video evidence.
Correct. And what the sources find particularly striking is that soldiers charged with these crimes received public support in Israel, calls for their exoneration. It suggests that some allegations made against Palestinians were, in a way, maybe an exposed confession of actions by parts of the Israeli military itself.
So tying this all together, what does this mean for the media's role in all this?
Well, the sources argue pretty strongly that Western mainstream media's coverage, described as deceptive, had real-world consequences for Palestinians, contributing to a narrative that sometimes branded them as human animals.
And there's that quote from a military contractor CEO.
Right, saying this intellectual battle is critical, because if we lose the intellectual debate, you will not be able to deploy any army in the West, ever. It highlights the stakes involved in controlling the narrative.
Okay, so this deep dive really reveals a stark contrast, doesn't it, between those initial widely shared narratives and what later came out, often contradicting the early reports. It just underscores the power of information in shaping how we all see things, and, tragically, how it can be used to justify actions with devastating results.
Absolutely. The prevalence of what these sources call atrocity propaganda, the sheer speed with which narratives form, spread, and then are sometimes questioned, it really raises an important question for you listening now. How might understanding this process change your approach to consuming news, especially during conflicts? And maybe what responsibility do we all share in trying to seek out the full, complex, often difficult truth? Something to think about.
Something to think about indeed. So I hope you understand. And if for those of you that actually want to watch the full documentary, you'll find the actual source materials, the list of people, how much they were paid, how it went to Netanyahu and went to Biden. It's an incredible piece of work. And you'll find out that the whole story is 1000% different to the story that is still told today. And then you ask yourself, what else do they lie about? So this is the proof of weapons network. Now, let's go through a few of the things that have been happening this week in geopolitics in terms of resistance as well. And let's try and follow some of the money in the proof of weapons network. There was after the bombings, the massive bombings in Gaza, Yemen via Ansarallah, otherwise known as Houthis in the mainstream media, they retaliated and continued to target shipping and do a shipping blockade. And so they took down ships. They only target those that are affecting Israel or trying to go into Israel. And they said that they will stop doing it as soon as Palestinian self-determination and Palestine is the illegal occupation is ended. At the same time, there's lots of chatter around Iran negotiations continuing. If you haven't watched my previous episodes, you'll know that I think that we are moving towards, thanks to China normalizing between Saudi Arabia and Iran, that we're moving to a negotiated solution. I think Iran is no longer backing the resistance, and the resistance are autonomous at this stage. But we had the theater, and I went through, you can go on my YouTube channel and see the play-by-play of the Iran-Israel conflict and the operations behind it, like Operation Gladio, where the military-industrial complex monetized strategic conflict between Iran and Israel. We had, as I covered in part 2, Saudi did actually join the BRICS summit, and Iran was there. So, it reiterates that they are neighbors, and while they've had a bad history and they have different ideologies, the relationship has never really been stronger. And there was a sudden shift within Israel and Gaza, where the Al-Qassam, which is essentially a Western-backed militia group kind of along the ISIS side, and there was resistance against it, where it suddenly led to there was a big upper hand over the IDF, and there were a lot of IDF soldiers that were taken out. And suddenly there's this upper hand. So somebody seems to be switching finance, while the West, we're slowly given narratives that make Americans think that there is a cover-up because Israel is the only one blackmailing America. And suddenly you get Tucker Carlson interviewing the Iranian president, prime minister, and suddenly you'll start to told more and more truth through these different networks around America doing the breakup of Israel, things that would have been completely wiped out and censored. You see how these operations for the strategic divorce slowly happen, so America can look powerful and ethical as it is being negotiated out of this decolonization that's happening. During the White House meeting, Netanyahu said in front of Trump, for the very first time, this has never been said before, I think Palestinians should be able to govern themselves. Now, it was met with other words like, we will take care of security and that will never change, and various other things. The fantasy negotiation as he negotiates his exit, which I think later leads to the Israeli cabinet being overthrown with the extreme factions going, and then a denuclearization and demilitarization process as Israel gets vassalized into the GCC. And America retreats this decolonization, but BlackRock's trying to get as much of the deals done as possible for this new energy-based artificial intelligence and vision for the different actors within the Middle East as well. So this is, kind of early signs that I think Israel will be moving towards cabinet removal. And eventually we'll get this normalization that won't look like the Abraham Shield, but will be designed to give Trump credit, as I've covered in previous episodes as well. Most think that Israel is in charge right now. I think that's the narrative that they want you to believe. If you're like in the Middle East or anything like that, if you're in different regions, most people know that Israel is a US colony, but in the West, it's this whole, slow release of, this type of narrative that's slightly changing as well over time. So we covered that in previous episodes, so I won't go too deep as well. But this week we did get a little glimpse into the process of what a US exit could look like. So it's interesting to watch because I think it's a beta test for what it will look like in other areas. If you don't know, there's in the Middle East, there's these Kurds that don't have their own land, but they occupy and they have militarized militias in various parts of Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria. And there are various groups which are classified, quote unquote, terrorist groups in the US, but they're backed by US. So US backs them in order to safeguard strategic assets. Like in Syria, the Kurds guard the oil for America so that they can sell the oil, have their black ops, and engage in the criminal networks like the ones that they're doing in Afghanistan, where they support the Taliban and in order to get the poppy seeds into the drug cartel network and various other things. But the US backed the communist Kurds, which is the army with the most number of women in the world as well. It's like a Marxist communist ideology. And they have various parties in each faction. One of them is called the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK. And today, there was actually a historic, what would you call it? Basically a milestone after one of the longest multi-decade post-World War II conflicts with the Kurds that have never had their own land. But they engaged into a deal that we covered in previous episodes. And it's a multi-decade end of a conflict between the PKK and Turkey. Because Turkey has a lot of exposure to, the Kurds and wants to resolve that issue. And they entered into an agreement. And today we actually had a ceremony which happened in Iraq. You probably won't in the Western media see it. But essentially PKK fighters, both women and men, were publicly burning their weapons and moving into integration. And so it's kind of signaling the commencement of basically the group's disarmament process, which is a month-long process. You eat milestones, you disarm, and you integrate. So it shows this can actually be done once America stops funding them. And that's essentially it. So these militia groups, you hear it always called Iran-backed proxy. Well, US-backed proxy Kurds, suddenly they're engaging in peace. And that's because I believe, you've seen my belief that the GCC have decolonized through diplomacy by partnering with BRICS. And that's what we're moving towards. And this was all following the PKK's May 2025 announcement that they've disabled the armed resistance and struggles after decades and decades. And that's what we see all around the region. And this can happen across the global south. It can happen across the Middle East as soon as we recognize that we're moving into a decolonization phase. But the problem is that you have to replace the backing up of the dollar. And that's the struggle that's being received right now. So the region has to do all this investment in the US to back up the dollar. And it's only happening because there was competition. And so all of these propagandas, all of these operations are actual operations to move the state, move to the next stage, which is why I don't think the full genocide is actually going to happen. And that's because Hamas is still on the land. Palestinians have resisted. They're not off the land. So you can't force ethnically cleanse them. And that only happens when the deal that's negotiated with Iran and negotiated with Hamas is actually agreed. And they'll put down their weapons as soon as the higher power structures have agreed and the Palestinian cause is resolved, because that is actually a bottom-up resistance that is obviously funded by state actors like Qatar and Iran as well. So this is basically an example. We get to see, what does US decolonization exit look like? Well, you're witnessing it. And this is the disarmament process. It is being overseen by Turkey and Iraq, and they've got their intelligence officials that are sat there watching this process, and it happens smoothly. I think similar things were happening in Syria, and you can expect more and more of this to actually happen. And then I think Iran will stop backing once the deal is reached, the resistance. And we can move to this very strong vision for the Middle East. And then BRICS and the GCC and the ASEAN countries, they can trade with each other. They can trade with America based upon the new tariff policy. They can start, rebuilding rather than going through the neocon holding back. They can start investing in each other. The global south can rise. Maybe they can start using their own resources. Once we've got through this, I'm very bullish around the future. We've obviously got this AI CBDC thing, and you get to protect yourself with Bitcoin, and countries get to build more power with Bitcoin. Companies get to hedge with Bitcoin as well. But we're going through this transition together. So at the moment, we're hinting towards a Gaza ceasefire. We haven't got one yet. The massacre campaign continues. I believe that eventually this will lead to a ceasefire. It will lead to an Israeli cabinet collapse. It will lead to the same model that we're seeing here will probably happen within Lebanon, and will probably happen within Yemen. There may be escalate to de-escalate. There may be more theater we have to see between Iran and Israel. Basically, my reading of this right now is that Iran is not backing the resistance because deals have been done. This is the transition phase that we're going through. And Israel and Netanyahu, they're still doing atrocities. They're still representing the military-industrial complex that's trying to make its last profits, while the financial-industrial complex and the technology-industrial complex is being ushered through. And what is their weapon? What is Netanyahu to make sure he doesn't go to prison? They're weaponizing genocide, and that's how this works. But I believe we're still going through the transition. The GCC will be the regional players. US will retreat, but BlackRock will still try and invest in the regional stability opportunities with the GCC. And Trump will still continue to send weapons to Ukraine, was announced as well, because Ukraine is taking over as much land as it can and as much rare earth minerals as it can from BlackRock, as it still from Ukraine, as it still engages in the destabilization campaign. That was announced at the very same dinner table. By the way, what happened to that whole peace negotiations? Oh no, I need to print more money, and I need to send them more weapons till the last Ukrainian, essentially. And Russia will end up, Ukraine is over, let's face it. They're now pulling out 18-year-olds. Trump's talking about the number of deaths that are happening. These are all leveraged negotiation tactics for the proof of weapons network, and Zelensky, Trump, and Netanyahu all work for the same forces with different factions. They all get their corruption, they get their deal as well. Trump said he's starting to come out saying he's not happy with Russia. He's not happy with Putin. Too many people are dying, leaning up to his narrative of being the negotiator of peace so that he can get the Nobel Peace Prize, while essentially he's negotiating more death and destruction for the proof of weapons network. It was announced that Russia will now import 1 million Indian workers in 2025 to replace the Russian men that have been sent off to Ukraine. So BRICS is doing deals. I guess, would you call that human trafficking? Sounds like it to me. These are the deals that are being done. But sadly, this is the destabilization campaign of Europe. It was designed to print the hell out of Europe, remove the manufacturing base of Germany, and put together a beta model for a surveillance state ushered by Palantir, where you create civil unrest campaigns, use open borders, create racial tensions, create religious tensions, create immigration tensions, and just use in puppet governments like Starmer in order to usher in sending all the money so that the US GDP print can happen. BlackRock and Russia will probably own all the land. It will be collateralized with BlackRock, and they'll be utilizing it to make weapon sales to the very last Ukrainian. We'll only get peace once the $1 trillion has been made. There was announcements from China. China said that it's willing to share military equipment achievements with friendly countries. This is announcements really with BRICS. It's starting to build its air force with Iran in this multipolar world. And I published a few blogs. And so if you want to go over to simondixon.com, I played you the AI summary around the truth about October the 7th. You can actually watch the full documentary. I also published a full documentary with all the sources for the truth about Jeffrey Epstein. You can watch the full one, and you can get the Jeffrey Epstein list from Ryan Dawson, who's done more work that I've studied from as well. I published a blog about the truth about JFK and the Israeli nuclear program. You can find out why JFK was assassinated by the Proof of Weapons Network and how that led to actually the weapons of mass destruction narrative and how the CIA was created. It even ties into the Jeffrey Epstein blackmail ring and the operations that are happening today. I will keep creating content to spread more truth so that you can understand how the Proof of Weapons Network works, so that you can get ahead of it, so we can follow the money and we can peacefully boycott proof of weapons with proof of work. We can boycott the Fed with Bitcoin. It was designed to be an antithesis to the central banking system. We can boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody rather than making them more powerful. We can boycott the banks by becoming wealthier and not actually engaging in debt-based Ponzi schemes and taking on debt and usury, which is what our we were told in, before the banksters took over and created the Proof of Weapons Network based upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme. We can boycott the global institutions that are ushering in the surveillance state wherever we can. We need to engage in their tools to be productive, but we can make sure that we're spending local, supporting our community. We can work, invest, spend in systems that are taking the success of Bitcoin and the proof of work network, build a decentralized artificial intelligence identity, create a tool that can give bottom-up movements as well. We have got lots of tools that we can use. We can recognize that boycotting, divestment is our way of implementing sanctions as well. They listen when share prices are impacted. If you own more Bitcoin each month than the previous month, if it has the same impact on you as it's had as everyone else I've been telling, then you might become wealthy enough to engage in lobby and actually change politics because they only listen with your money, because there are solutions out there. I go to the darkest side because without peace, without truth, there can be no peace. And then I leave you with solutions once I've named the perpetrators, so you're not working under futile activity because you don't know the truth. And that's what we do at Bitcoin Hard Talk. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Those that don't know this could get wrecked. Those that do can do incredibly well. I want you to be on the right side of this change, and I want you to be prepared because it takes time to prepare for this. And so please help me get my 100K subscribers so I can get that review. Approximately 25 people that watch this video to the end are not subscribers. If you all came subscribers, I'd be on 100K, and then we can get that review. If during that review it turns out that they don't like what they see, then follow me on X because the algorithm will allow me to stream for now, and you can get a lot more content in real time there as well. In case that doesn't work and the algorithm gets too oppressive, I'll upload it to Spotify podcast where you can download it, and Apple Podcast as well. And in case those channels go, you can follow me on Rumble, where I stream it there as well. And in case all of the centralized counterparties, I've got my own infrastructure on simondixon.com, where you can become a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. And we can stream from there, and I can give exclusive content. And also you can join my newsletter so I can let you know if any of that actually happens. So I need your support there. Leave a comment, like, share, make sure more and more people get this content. That's going to be everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 89, part 3, this week in Geopolitics. In part 1, we covered Bitcoin and everything that's happening this week. In part 2, we covered macro. And in part 3, we covered, the whole truth behind the Musk and following the money. In part 1, we covered why the price of Bitcoin was at new all-time highs. And in part 3, we got the truth behind the Epstein files and why you're not seeing them right now. And I'll see you this time next week for everything that happens in the week ahead at Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 90. We do it with peace, love, and unity. And I'll see you on any of those networks. Peace.